throughout the
Feel free.
hearing.
Oh, yeah, I've got that. Yeah, okay. Order. Welcome to this afternoon session of the Business and Trade Select Committee and the second session in our inquiry on the Employment Rights Bill and industrial relations in the UK. Thank you so much indeed to our witnesses for joining us. We appreciate there are some reporting restrictions on what some of you can say ahead of your results, but we're really grateful to you for making time to give evidence to us today. Mr. McCall, perhaps I could start with you. We now have 160 cases of abuse reported to the BBC at McDonald's. We have 300 cases that have been reported to the Equalities Watchdog. We have 700 people, former employees of McDonald's, taking legal action against you. Has McDonald's basically now become a predator's paradise?
Since I saw you over November 2023, I've put in place a programme of significant change within our business, which has seen us strengthen our standards. It's seen us launch a wide-ranging cultural action plan which guarantees our ability to detect, to deter, and to deal with any forms of harassment in our business. Not just robust, but they're industry-leading, and it's working. We have seen...
Well, you say it's working. I mean, one victim told the BBC that managers inappropriately touched her, and when she raised it, she was told to suck it up. Another female worker says a male manager sent her topless pictures. Another victim says a shift manager asked her for sex in return for extra shifts. She was 17. Now, when you came before us last time, you said you were absolutely determined to root out these behaviours and eradicate these people from the business. It sounds to us, from what the BBC have said today, that you failed.
Those allegations described are abhorrent, unacceptable, and there is no place for them in McDonald's.
Have they been allowed to happen?
I would like to be able to investigate each of those, to understand them and ensure that we're able to take the appropriate action and deal with them. We have not got room for anybody in our business who behaves in that manner. The measures that I've put in place mean that we are able to offer a secure, safe workplace where people are respected and feel included. I hear that from our people. It's working. I know this because they tell me they know how to speak up. They're confident that if they do speak up, management will take appropriate action. And 9 out of 10 people recommending McDonald's as a great place to work on the back of it.
Then since we last met in November 2023, how many managers or staff have been dismissed as a result of investigations into allegations like the appalling allegations we've read about in the BBC today?
A large part of my focus, one of the most important moves we've made, is to enhance our speak-up channels. We've just launched a new channel called Red Flags, which is designed by our people for our people.
But how many managers have been dismissed as a result?
As a result, people are speaking up, and we continue to investigate all allegations. For sexual harassment, we have seen 75 allegations made, which resulted in 47 being upheld with disciplinary action and 29 people being dismissed over the latest 12-month period.
Okay, and how many franchises have been now terminated as a result of allegations at those particular stores?
We hold all of our franchisees to account to a broad set of standards, including standards around people. We have a significant programme to review that of both announced and unannounced visits and a whole set of measures that are put in place. Those are ultimately that allows us to assess our franchisees and their ability to uphold the standards we expect within McDonald's.
How many franchises have been terminated as a result of allegations of abuse?
I'll move aside from allegations because we don't have any who have been terminated for allegations. Okay. However, across the last 5 years, we have had 15 franchisees who have left the McDonald's system because of being unable to deliver the right level of performance, and 6 of those were failing to meet the standards required for people practices.
Okay, so do you accept, based on the experience that you've had, that ultimately this kind of abuse flourishes where there is an imbalance of power in the workplace?
The type of allegations that you describe are not widespread. They are isolated incidents that must be driven out of our business.
But you've got
700
people bringing a legal action against you, 300 cases reported to the EHRC. The EHRC, we're told, is asking you to take tougher action. 160 cases of abuse reported to the BBC. It doesn't sound like that these are isolated incidents. It sounds like there is a pattern of abuse in what's become, frankly, a hotbed of harassment.
I don't want to belittle any of those allegations. Every single one is important. But what I should be clear is that, put those numbers in context that you mentioned, those by far the majority refer to the period before the new action plan we put in place. And they refer to the historic position that people have investigated. So that's not a reflection of where the culture is in McDonald's today and all the changes that we've driven over the course of the last 12 to 18 months.
Would you accept that the abuse that we've heard about tends to flourish where there is an imbalance of power in a workplace?
This isn't an issue about imbalance of power. This is about an issue about very poor behaviour from individuals in the organisation. And when it occurs, it doesn't occur necessarily where somebody's in a position of power. These are behaviours that happen from bad-minded people acting in a completely unacceptable manner, and I have no time for them. I'm angry that people think they can behave this way in our business.
Literally, you don't think an imbalance of power has anything to do with a permissive environment for abuse, and like the abuse that we've heard about in the BBC today?
Our managers are our first line of defence against any form of bad behaviour or harassment.
Many of these allegations are about managers.
I don't see any pattern that suggests that poor behaviour is driven by managers at all. We do have managers who have had to be disciplined and dismissed. There is no question about that. But this is about ensuring that everybody, regardless of their level in the organisation, behave in the way that we expect within McDonald's to support what is a dynamic, positive culture in which our teams look after each other.
But that must be surely harder to put in place if you have got, as you have, 90% of your workforce on 0 hours contracts.
Not at all. We offer every McDonald's employee the opportunity to choose whether they prefer to have...
If you've got an example of an individual who says a shift manager asked her for sex in return for extra shifts, I mean, you've obviously got a problem where somebody who is on a 0 hours contract is in a more vulnerable position.
As that behaviour is completely unacceptable, it's abhorrent, and I want to investigate it and be able to deal with any wrongdoing that's occurred there. That is a one-off installation. That's an issue of people's behaviour, disgusting behaviour. That is not an issue of the contract people. Everybody who works at McDonald's has the opportunity to choose whether they'd like one of our flexible contracts or guaranteed hours contract. Now, about 17,000 people at the moment have chosen guaranteed hours contracts, and the rest choose flexible. We know that the flexible contracts are particularly popular with young people, and nearly 70% of our people are under the age of 25.
So you do not accept that the pervasive use of 0 hours contracts creates imbalances of power, and imbalances of power creates a vulnerability for abuse to flourish. You don't accept that argument.
When considering work contracts, for me, it's about the quality of contract. It's not about the number of hours that are stipulated. Our flexible contracts have all the same provisions as a guaranteed hours contract, other than specifying the number of hours that somebody has to work every single week. And that's a preference for young people, to be able to choose to work more hours during their holidays, and maybe to work not at all during times of exam periods, for example. So the rest of the contract, the holiday pay they accrue, the statutory sick pay, maternity, paternity rights, all of those are exactly the same as a guaranteed hours contract. And of course, every single person can choose a guaranteed hours contract if they'd like. Quite frankly, it helps me if more people choose a guaranteed hours contract, because we know that more of our hours in the restaurant's working week are automatically covered. But I don't want to force people to do something they don't want to do. Part of working for McDonald's is the flexibility it brings to our employees, and it's one of the main reasons people like to stay with us.
I just want to make sure we've got this on the record. You don't think that pervasive use of 0 hours contracts leads to imbalances of power in the workplace?
Contracts that we offer in McDonald's, which are fair contracts, do not create any sort of systemic behaviour or issue with balances of power. I am very confident of that, and I believe that we have in place all of the right people checks to ensure that no managers are using them that way. So it's important to understand how we schedule hours in our restaurant. That helps.
Well, I'm just wondering if that is true, then how can we have victims making allegations that shift managers asked a 17-year-old girl for sex in return for extra shifts?
I would like to investigate that particular occasion and ensure that we can deal with any wrongdoing that has happened on that particular occasion. Because it's very rare for the manager of a shift to be the person who is scheduling the people that shift. And typically, one of our restaurants will have anything between 10 and 20 managers. One of those at any point in time will be responsible for scheduling overall. And that responsibility often changes from one period to the next to keep it fresh. So it's not a situation that builds a certain power among one individual who can then control exactly who works what and when. It's also bound by a system that does most of the work for you.
And so what has the EHRC asked you to do most recently?
So we have a wide-ranging agreement with the HRC that we signed in February 2023. It has many.
Have they asked you to strengthen the arrangements?
We are working with them to strengthen it. Part of our expectation when we first started working with them is that our agreement with them would evolve over time as we learn where the priorities need to be, and we're in ongoing conversation about strengthening it. We have not yet reached a position of being clear what that strengthening might look like.
So why have they made that request of you?
As I said, we expected to continue to evolve the arrangement we have. As new information comes to light, as we understand where the opportunities to get stronger are, then we're evolving that agreement in the way that we're evolving our plans all the time as a business that's green and growing.
So it's said that you're, as a company, one of the most vociferous advocates for retaining the flexibilities for 0 hours contracts in the consultation that is being undertaken by the department. Are you arguing to keep the flexibilities of the current 0 hours contract regime?
We are involved in the consultation, and I must congratulate the government on the way they're consulting with business on the Workers' Right Bill, and I'm very pleased to be part of that discussion with the Secretary of State and the Deputy Prime Minister. Our position is very clear that against all of the measures, there are 4 screens that I put to them. They are, first and foremost, are practicality, then affordability, then the encouragement of further employment, and then growth. Practicality is very, very important in our industry, and it's good to be able to represent the hospitality industry because we experience peaks and troughs which are much greater than other retailers and much less predictable. They're driven by very, very local events. So flexibility is really, really important. 0 hours contract is not. But what's important for me is that people have choice. And knowing that our people want to choose, or a number of people want to choose a flexible contract that does not commit them to working every single week is really important. So that's what I want to maintain, the ability of people to choose. I expect everyone to be offered the opportunity to be able to have a guaranteed hours contract, and I expect to have the flexibility to be able to continue to operate our business in such a dynamic environment. And I know you'll be familiar from your own experience in your early days of working in our restaurants of just how those trading patterns go up and down.
Just cutting through that, thank you for that answer, but does that mean you are basically arguing to retain the current flexibilities, or are you happy with the government's proposals as they have set out in the bill?
So we're very, we want to contain flexibility. The consultation continues, and I think absolutely should continue. There is proposals to create contracts that are based on the number of hours that people have worked. I think that's entirely reasonable. The point that we need to continue consulting on is what is that period of time that we look back over for what people work, because it needs to reflect the way those peaks and troughs work over the course of a year, rather than periods of time that could leave you with either not enough or too many people because of the different shapes of the business. So that's the most. So it's as ever, it's in getting the detail absolutely right. But the concept is something we very much support. The concept of the whole Employment Right Bill is a direction of travel that I very much support. It will help us ensure that everybody has access to good jobs, the type of jobs we offer at McDonald's, which everyone should be able to, and I think it will help level the playing field.
When do you expect to get to a position where there will be 0 reports from your staff of abuse and harassment in McDonald's restaurants?
I can be very clear with you that I won't be happy until there is.
I'm sure you won't be happy, but when do you think you will get to that point?
I understand and that we are operating in a world where harassment is an issue for businesses, organisations and institutions, and we can never ever be complacent. We will employ around 230,000 different people over the course of next year, and I will always need to have a permanent focus on dealing with and eradicating harassment. And I'm realistic that that's something that we have to do.
But you can't give us a guarantee, or you can't give us a timeline for when McDonald's will be abuse-free.
I cannot guarantee a time when there will be no allegations raised. And in fact, if there was nobody speaking up, I'd be concerned that something was stopping people speaking up. My aim is to make sure that there is nobody who has any doubt at all that McDonald's is a business that will not tolerate harassment of any kind. And I'm a leader. I really am a leader who believes that every single person should be able to come to work feeling safe. They should be able to come to work and be respected. And everybody should be included, no matter where they're from, what their background is and what they believe in. That is what I stand for, and that's what my business stands for. Okay. And we will continue to drive everything we can to do that. At the heart of it is having the best speak-up process. Because a business in which speak-up is healthy, in which people believe in it and trust in it, is a business in which there is no hiding place for bad actors. And that is what I'm searching to do.
Thank you. I think people will be concerned that there wasn't a timeline, but let me come into Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. In November 2023, one of your franchisees told our predecessor committee about your performance and customer excellence system. And she said then that we monitor everything that's happening, particularly around people practices. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. There is a specific module of it which is purely dedicated to people practices. We call it Putting People First visits. And there is also a part of every visit which includes people questions to make sure that we always have an unannounced element so that we can always be confident that what we're experiencing when we do these reviews is the reality of what's happening in the restaurant.
So in September 2024, when the BBC reported about a McDonald's restaurant in Cambridgeshire where there were 9 victims of modern slavery working in one of your restaurants, where those victims worked between 70 and 100 hours a week, and 4 of them were paid into the same bank account, why did your systems not spot that? And your people not spot it?
Yes, let me just talk about the context there. So, over 10 years ago, a criminal gang infiltrated one of our restaurants, and in 2015, 2016, just at the time that Theresa May, as Home Secretary, was talking about the evolving face of modern-day slavery, they were able to recruit some people to work in that restaurant. It's around 10 years ago. The face of modern-day slavery was very different then, and businesses' ability to understand it, recognise it, and detect it, I'm afraid, wasn't where it is today. We have certainly learned from that experience, and today it would be very unlikely to not be detected because we've put 6 significant steps in place. The first is simply today all of our managers are aware of what modern-day slavery looks like and how to detect it. The second is that when we recruit people, we no longer allow the use of interpreters. Back in those days, an interpreter was able to step in, which clearly created a barrier. The third area is we now have much more protection around the number of hours that people work. So anybody who elects to work more than the 48 hours stipulated has to go through a conversation interview process to confirm that they're doing it of their own free will and that that's what they want to do. We also now have the ability to double check on bank accounts. So any time where more than one person has the same bank account, we're able to ask questions. Of course, it doesn't mean slavery is happening. It may simply be husband and wife, but it allows us to tackle that. We then have much broader awareness that is spiked around the National Slavery Day, which allows us to make sure that everybody in the restaurant is aware what modern-day slavery looks like, because quite often the managers may not see what people's colleagues do. And finally, and really importantly, is having the best whistleblowing approach. And we do that now in partnership with Unseen, a leading charity in modern-day slavery, to ensure that people have got a route to speak up anonymously, because what we do understand is that it's a very frightening space and people are often intimidated and not prepared to speak, and that gives us the best chance. So I think today, with that level of protection, it's much harder, although we do have to understand we are dealing with organised criminal gangs in this area.
You said a few times about 10 years ago. To confirm, the BBC's report says this ended in 2019, which isn't 10 years ago. These people, though, paid into the same bank accounts. 4 people paid into that same bank account, £215,000. Do you think at the time McDonald's was negligent in not spotting these signs of modern-day slavery?
I think that it was a very different time. The understanding of modern-day slavery...
It might have been a different time, but do you think McDonald's was negligent at the time?
I don't think we were negligent at that time, no.
Do you think it should have been spotted at the time?
It's very hard for me to project myself back to that period of time, but I certainly...
Do you think it should have been? If you were going into one of those into that restaurant, do you think you would have spotted it?
I don't think I would have spotted it. From everything I understand...
Someone working 100 hours a week or someone on a 30-hour shift?
I think for a one-off occasion, it would have been dealt with and considered to have been... maybe it was a management mistake.
When you came to us back in... last year, back in November 2023, did you know about this incident?
In November 2023, I was only aware that there was a court case ongoing and we were taking part in it, yes.
Why didn't you report it to us at the time?
It wasn't part of the conversation, wasn't something I was asked about.
Well, you were asked specifically, though, about McDonald's duty of care. And you told the chair of the committee at the time, for me, it's more than a legal responsibility, for me, it's a commitment. So it was something that was pertinent to the conversation, would you not have thought? But if we can't confirm that if we don't raise a specific question with you, you're not going to tell us everything that we may need to know about this, how can we be sure as a committee that problems that are going on at McDonald's aren't being hidden away from the public?
You have is my word and my commitment as somebody who puts his personal values and integrity front and centre to everything he does, not just as a leader but as a person. It tells you that I will be completely open and transparent and answer your questions as full away as possible.
You gave that commitment in November 2023.
Absolutely.
You didn't tell us. So you gave that commitment in November, that exact same commitment, almost word for word, in November 2023. You didn't tell us about it, but now you're telling us that, oh, well, you're open and transparent about things. So where's the change? The words don't match the rhetoric.
I'm sorry, I think you're misrepresenting the situation. But perhaps if you could identify for me the question that would have allowed me to answer that particular area, I would have done. It was not a secret. It was, it was a public court case. Yes, there was reporting restrictions at that point in time, but it's not something that I in any way attempted to cover up, hide, or anything else. I failed to understand where I didn't provide the transparency that would be expected.
Weston?
Yeah, Mr. Macrow, the chair has explained that there are about 700 cases outstanding currently. How many outlets do you have?
We have 1,563 outlets at this point in time in the UK and Ireland.
Simple maths would suggest 1 in 2 McDonald's outlets has some sort of case against it, although probably there are centres or issues in particular outlets or operations. Is that the case?
I have very little visibility of those people who have quite rightly taken up their right to be represented by a legal firm, or all the times at which those occasions, those events happen. So I'm really not sure over what period of time or what number of restaurants that particularly covers.
It's a staggering number, isn't it, compared to the number of outlets you have? 700 cases.
As I've said previously, one case is too many as far as I'm concerned. And it's absolutely my intention to do everything I can to remove all forms of harassment from our business.
You wrote to us as the previous committee on the 30th of November 2023 saying that McDonald's doesn't have a duty of care to workers within the outlets. Your tone today suggests you've changed your view, perhaps, of that. To the public, the people working are McDonald's workers. Are they McDonald's workers? They wear McDonald's uniforms. You're very insistent about franchise standards. To all extents and purposes, they are McDonald's people, aren't they? They are McDonald's workers.
We operate 170 or so restaurants ourselves. People working in those restaurants are McDonald's employees.
And
those who
the franchise,
those working in our franchise restaurants,
they wear the same uniforms, don't they?
They are employees of a separate business, of the individual franchisee's business. They are independent business people running very good small and medium-sized businesses, and they are the employer. They take the legal right. But those franchisees are not just held by the legal law of the land like everybody else. They're also upheld to a higher level of standards that we expect as McDonald's, because they are the representation of our brand in this country.
They're McDonald's workers?
No, the workers are employed by the franchisee in each of those areas. They work under the McDonald's brand, and we expect them to enjoy the same employment experience wherever they work and for whichever franchisee they work for. But ultimately, they're employed by the franchisee.
You have a duty of care to those who are within your own sites, but you don't have a duty of care to those who are not in your sites. So there's a differential in terms of whether they're McDonald's workers or not between the two.
The legal responsibility is very different if you're the employer versus if you're not the employer.
You've told us you're determined to fix the problems that we've discussed, and you've made certain claims just now saying that you want to establish a secure workplace. There's no room in your business for these sorts of incidents. Why don't you just accept liability, given the sign across the door is McDonald's?
Our business is based on understanding the value that franchising brings. We run a better business because we're franchised. The act of placing a highly experienced, talented business leader into a small and medium-sized business where they know their people, they know their customers, they're able to support their local community, have a financial and emotional stake in running that business well, yields very good results for everybody, for our customers, our people, and the corporation. So that is a model that has underpinned the success of McDonald's worldwide for a long time, and it means that we run a very good business in this country.
I just want to bottom this out, Mr. Macrow. So I asked you in November 23, is that duty of care a legal responsibility? And you said it certainly is a legal responsibility, and then wrote to us on the 30th of November 2023, walking back that commitment, and you wrote the legal responsibilities and duty of care towards employees of franchisees sit with the relevant franchisee. So you said one thing in the committee, and you really nailed your colours to the mast, because you went over and above the language and said not only it's a legal responsibility, you also said it's a personal commitment for you. But the letter that came 2 weeks later walked back the statement you'd made to the committee. So I think we just want to know, did you mislead the committee or did you misunderstand your legal obligations?
What is explained in the letter is the exact correct position. When I look at the transcript from our conversation, I think there is a misunderstanding to which part of the question I was answering, if I remember correctly. But it's very clear. The legal responsibility sits with the employer. That is absolute and is very clear. McDonald's employs one group of people, and each of our franchisees employ their own group of people. However, I expect everybody who works under McDonald's brand to be able to experience the right McDonald's employment experience, and that is what we hold people to account, franchisees to account, through our franchising standards, and we review them on a regular basis against that to ensure that's what's happening.
Okay, Charlie Maynard?
Yes, just a question about the instances in your wholly owned restaurants versus your franchise restaurants. Presumably you look and compare at where these cases come up. Is there a pattern between your restaurants and your franchise restaurants in terms of, do you have fewer cases in your own restaurants, or is there no pattern at all? What do you see there?
Harassment is an issue we have to face up to in every part of our business, regardless of who owns the restaurant. We don't see any particular trends that suggests it occurs more in one part than another part. It's something that we have to be committed to and alert to in every single place we operate.
Sorry, just sticking with that. So quantitatively, whether it's the UK or I'm sure you've got visibility globally, are you saying that really there's no material difference between your wholly owned restaurants and your franchisees? I'm sure you've looked at that in detail. That there's no trends there to speak of.
Certainly on this issue, our franchisees perform just as well as our company-owned restaurants. And that doesn't surprise me. You have experienced business people running quite small businesses very, very close to their people. And so they care deeply about those people, are in their restaurants and are able to manage the right standards. To become a McDonald's franchisee is hard work. It takes a year to be recruited and to be trained. It's not a case of somebody just having a lot of money turning up. It's about somebody who wants to not just own, but operate a restaurant, be in there. And we only take people on who know how to and are motivated to run restaurants, to look after people, to develop cultures. And so my expectation is our franchisees, across most measures, will run our best restaurants. They have the commitment, both financial and emotional, that drives that will.
Yukimo?
Thank you, Chair. The culture and the tone of any company is always led by the top and by the leadership. So how do you think, that apart from spot checking that you're doing, to actually sort of eliminate or reduce the number of cases for any sort of inappropriate behaviour? Because all I've heard so far is spot checking. What other mechanisms do you have?
So I completely agree with you. I think that culture starts with the leaders in the business, and it is upon all of us to demonstrate not just the right behaviours, but the right approaches to drive the right culture. Those changes we put in place, that we made, it's a wide range in cultural action. If I just took perhaps the three biggest that we've put in place. The first is the launching of the new Red Flags Speak Up campaign that I mentioned. That is designed by the people, for the people. It's in their language. It frames potential issues in the way that they understand and relevant to them, and it gives them the ability to digitally and immediately speak up should they have a problem. And so that's critical, because if people are comfortable about speaking up and everyone's confident they'll speak up, there's no hiding place. The second big area for me was a significant investment in creating our investigation handling unit headed by our Director of Workplace Investigations. That allows people to be confident that we will be able to assess very quickly every single allegation that's made and ensure that there is a thorough and professional and fair investigation backed up by external legal experts where required and where more complex and serious, that will take place at speed, so people are confident that we'll get the right disciplinary action.
Are these cases going to the police when needed and when necessary?
So
obviously some of these are quite dire, situations that have arise. So what actually happens afterwards?
In the case of criminal activity, and fortunately most allegations are not criminal, but in the case of criminal activity, we will always ask the person who is reporting to take their case to the police. But it must be the decision of the individual to make to do it themselves. And that's something we've learned from working with organisations like the EHRC, because reporting to the police against the will of an individual can often put them at personal risk. So we will always encourage them to go to the police and support them in doing that, but that is their own personal choice to do so.
Okay, Antonia Bounce.
Thank you very much. You've talked about the importance of culture being led from the top, but I'm afraid I need to return to this issue of employment contracts, because I just don't see how you can root out harassment and bullying and create the culture where people can speak up when 9 in 10 of your workers are employed on 0 hours contracts, which by definition open the door to favouritism, open the door to bullying, open the door to sexual harassment. We've heard about sex for shifts happening in one of your restaurants, and if it's happened once, it will have happened more than once. I also think I heard you say that you would like to eliminate 0 hours contracts from your business. I very much hope that the Employment Rights Bill will enable you to do that. But would you agree that the continued use of 0 hours contracts enables predatory managers and puts workers at greater risk of bullying and sexual harassment?
First of all, just to correct one of your assumptions there, I did not say that I'd like to eliminate flexible hour contracts from our business. What I said is I'd be very happy to have more people on guaranteed hours, because that helps us with the staffing of the restaurants. And no, I do not accept that premise at all. What you describe are cultural issues that must be addressed. They're not contractual issues in any way, shape or form. Most businesses, particularly...
Not understood. It's absolutely a cultural issue. If the manager can say, if you behave in a way I don't like, I won't give you the shifts that you need next week. Or if you don't give me this sexual favour, I won't give you the shifts that you need next week. By definition, that is how 0 hours contracts work. They put too much power in the hands of managers, and they give very little recourse to workers. And you're expecting these workers to speak up and disclose sexual harassment at work?
Please let me explain how it works in a McDonald's restaurant. I think two really important things here to consider. First of all, the way our Speak Up channels work. They don't go to the manager. They can be anonymous. They do not put anybody at risk from speaking up. So speaking up to say that I've had an issue and have not been able to get the hours I wanted, or somebody has asked for something, a level of behaviour for me to get those hours, is not something that we're unable to deal with. That can be dealt with through speaking up without going anywhere near the manager at all, so that protects the individual. Also, as I explained earlier, we may have as many as 20 plus managers in a restaurant. Anyone may be doing the schedule for 2 weeks' time for any 1 week. So the power doesn't sit with one manager who is able to determine what's going to happen to everybody in the restaurant. And it's driven by a system. It's a computerised system that sits behind it as well. What determines people's working hours is their number of hours they'd like to work, the hours they are available to work, and the available hours that we have to offer out. Now, of course, it's not just people who are on flexible contracts who might be looking for more hours. Somebody on a guaranteed hours contract, maybe they have opted for a 12-hour-a-week contract, but this week they would like to work 22 hours. If we have 22 hours that match their availability, we'll be able to give it to them. They will also be looking to increase their hours. It's not simply people on flexible contracts who will be asking to work more hours at times, or indeed asking to reduce less sometimes.
And Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lorains, if I could start with you. The BBC reported that victims of modern slavery were forced by the same gang that my colleague mentioned, were forced to work for Speciality Flatbreads Limited. They supplied products to you and to other leading supermarkets. I wonder if you could tell us when you first became aware of concerns about this particular supplier, what the detail of those concerns were, and probably most importantly, what action did you take as a result of that?
Absolutely, and thank you for your question. So in 2022, we were made aware of the allegations, actually almost simultaneously through the charity Unseen and also through our own internal visits to the site. We worked with Unseen to conduct a thorough investigation and an independent assessment of what had happened. And actually, due to the nature of the findings and the concerns, we shared the details with Unseen, with the police and with the GLAA. Actually, we were informed via Unseen that the police would visit the site, but the GLAA had confirmed it was outside of their remit. We actually didn't receive any further updates until the BBC programme was aired, but we stopped taking from that site as soon as we had concluded the investigation.
Okay, and then so following on from that, and this is perhaps a question for both of you, what systemic changes did you make to your own internal processes then? Because of that case, were you concerned that you hadn't picked up on the difficulties yourselves, that it took an external source to come to you and tell you about that? Did you make changes? Perhaps you first, Mr. Lorains.
So when I look at our approach to human rights, and maybe if I can start by saying to the committee that at Tesco we take incredibly seriously the human rights of our workers in our own supply chain and in our own operation and our supply chains. And the approach we take is very much a risk-based approach. So we have a 5-step process in our own operation and our supply chain, which starts with a risk assessment of both the country of production and also the type of product. We then look at looking at prioritisation and understanding our leverage, so where we can make the biggest difference. We then move on to the 3rd stage, which is mitigation, followed then by grievance and remediation, which is where, should we be made aware of issues from anyone, obviously including from ourselves, we move forward. And then finally, monitoring and communication, because unfortunately human rights risks are in the world. There are some higher risk countries where there are higher risks, or some higher risk areas there are higher risk, and therefore we need to remain vigilant but also transparent in sharing our learnings.
To err is human, but to correct is divine. So we're trying to understand what failed in this instance, and what did you learn from that?
So in this instance, we were made aware through 2 routes. So our annual technical audit, which we conduct of all of our sites, we were aware when we went to...
You've told us how you became aware. We're trying to understand what failed? Why did you end up in this situation?
So, Mr. Byrne, if I may explain, so from a perspective of human rights in our supply chain, we have several layers of how we protect.
Understand that.
In our supply chains, we therefore have very clear requirements for all of our suppliers.
Understand that as well. But my question is, what failed?
And in this instance, I think a little bit like Mr. Macrow shared, there clearly was a criminal gang involved in the recruitment of workers. As soon as we were made aware, and I know you're asking what failed, as soon as we were made aware, we put in place a rapid investigation and our remediation. But in this instance, there was a criminal gang who had placed workers into a supplier site of ours. And unfortunately, I'm sure the committee have heard from other members and other witnesses, the seasonal worker scheme and migrant worker schemes in the UK are placing, I think, an increased risk of this. And therefore, it is absolutely essential that we are 100% vigilant all the time, and that is what we aim to do.
So the radar, basically, your radar, you've described a very sophisticated radar, but it just didn't pick up this incident. It didn't pick up this risk.
So our radar is designed to look as broadly as possible in a proactive basis, but unfortunately, and I would, my job is every day to come to work with my team and try to absolutely avoid every instance of any human rights abuse.
So when you looked at this case then, what did you think to yourself? What did you say to yourself and your team about how you could stop it happening again? You said the radar failed. How do you build a better radar for the future?
If I maybe may say, Mr. Byrne, the radar didn't fail in that we did pick up through our own audit at a similar time to Unseen that there were issues, and that led us to investigate. That is one part of our radar. One of the things that I maybe can talk about is one of the things we have implemented since this incident is actually how do we use digital threat intelligence, so scanning more digital sources of information, because audits are a very, very powerful tool, but they are one part of a toolkit, and they are part of a toolkit which is about a moment in time. So what we have within what we have within our programme is, if I look at the radar, we have our audits, which are an annual programme from a technical perspective and risk-based from a human rights perspective. However, at the same time, in every one of our primary supplier sites in the UK and in our high-risk countries, we have a protector line. So in Tesco, we have a protector line for our own colleagues, which is an anonymous line that you can call into. But in every one of our primary sites in the UK and in 33 countries, including our high-risk countries, in 180 different languages, we have a line where I can have my voice heard, because that's one of the things that is critical to me, is that any worker in our supply chain's voice is heard. Now, unfortunately, in this instance, those workers didn't come to us, but we were able to see it through our audit, and we were able to see it through the work with Unseen. And in addition, what we have done since is look at how can we look at digital tools to help us scan even more and enhance our worker voice.
If you take a step up now from Tesco's to UK PLC, what do you think are the changes in the law that would help UK PLC build collectively a better radar?
So for me, there's probably three things I would be encouraging government to look at, and these are across the range of avoiding and mitigating human rights abuses. The first, I think, is around how can you support Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act. So we think, as I have mentioned, we think transparency is an essential part of businesses being able to demonstrate what they are doing. And our ask would be to make sure that businesses are complying with disclosing, but also that those disclosures are sufficiently detailed enough to allow rigour and transparency. The second point would be around actually having the right resource within the government agencies that support. So the GLAA is critical in the work we do, but I think we certainly would would say that additional resource would allow them to respond more rapidly. Now, obviously, the Fair Work Agency will be bringing in multiple agencies together, but we would be asking that the resourcing is in line more with the ILO recommendation of 1 agent per 100,000 workers, which I believe from what we're hearing is about 1/3 of what the GLAA is working on. And then I think the third point that we would talk about is actually making sure that every body within this sphere that is seen as a modern slavery first responder is very clear on being trained so that they understand their responsibilities. And then finally, if I may, Mr. Byrne, I know I've mentioned it already, but I do believe the seasonal worker scheme is probably the one or the main weak point in our UK labour approach. It is unfortunately exposing workers to migrant workers to risk of abuse through debt bondage. And actually, if I may give context, of the 21 labour allegations in our supply chain that we published in our modern slavery report last year, 11 of those actually referenced the seasonal worker scheme. So if I may, Chair.
Which one to finish the point?
It's probably the same question really to you. In McDonald's, what did you do differently? And again, how you feel? And again, I appreciate the difficulty here. These people are bad actors, but the system has to be designed to take account of that. You must realise there are people out there like that. And I was interested as well to hear that Tesco have a risk register. It's unfortunate that the UK obviously has to be by its nature on that risk register as well, I imagine.
So for our restaurants, it's the 6 steps that I outlined earlier. So it's the additional awareness amongst our managers. It's the removal of interpreters from the recruitment process. It's the duplicate bank account checks that we now run systematically. It's the review of working hours, both when somebody requests to go beyond 48, but also historic review through all of our putting people first visits we do, and it's the whistleblowing hotline. Those are the things that we've put in place. And whilst I can't guarantee that had they been in place when those people recruited 2015, 2016, I think there's an increased chance we would have spotted it. Certainly the duplicate bank accounts, if we were able to flag that, would have allowed us to ask more questions. Of course, it does always still rely on those people you're asking the questions of being prepared to flag the issue, but of course we today would have the partnership with Unseen to get them to help us from that perspective as well.
Hi, afternoon. So what is Tesco's approach to sourcing product from Xinjiang in China now?
So we have no operations in Xinjiang, and we do not source from the Xinjiang region, and we haven't done so since April 22, following our government advice and following our previous letter to government.
Okay, and then obviously you all know very well about the Panorama programme and Antonio Petty and shell companies and all of this. I mean, what surprises me is if I was in your shoes, I would be like, well, look, the product coming out of Xinjiang, things like cotton, tomatoes, well-known products coming out. In the Panorama programme, that they used an origin verification firm to look at the tomatoes and found that yours plus Morrison's, Waitrose and Asda's all had a Chinese profile. It's not that hard to do. So what I don't understand is why, if you're really serious about rooting that out, why not just run these checks on all the obvious products all the time?
So maybe I can answer that in a few different ways, because it is... when you are looking at a complex allegation of origin differences, there are many steps that we need to take. So maybe if I may just briefly talk about what we do within our broader supply chain. So it is absolutely our commitment, and it is my job to make sure that, and I'm responsible for making sure that the products we sell are safe, they are legal, they are good quality, and they are responsibly and sustainably sourced. And that is our commitment to our customers. Through that, we use multiple layers to make sure that our supplier partners who we work with are delivering what we would expect. So that starts with our terms and conditions and our, as you would expect, our policies. Then it also includes additional levels of specific specifications on each product. And then a compliance mechanism which includes audits, does also include traceability, so data checks. So actually, when we conduct an audit, we go into store, we pick up a physical product. Hopefully this will help to explain. We pick up a physical product, we go back to the site and we say within 3 hours, you need to show us the traceability on the paperwork of exactly what's gone into that product. And we do use testing. So specifically, we do use surveillance testing, as you have spoken. Specifically, what the leading scientific bodies within country of origin testing specifically would say is, it is a very useful tool, but it is not conclusive by itself. So when we were...
With respect, I totally agree with everything you say. I've got no question on that. But it's not conclusive. But are you de facto running tests on the obvious products all the time? Or because if not, why wouldn't you be?
So we run tests from a risk-based perspective on various different elements, either in a proactive programme and in a reactive programme.
And in Xinjiang, are you running proactively on cotton, tomatoes and whatever else that comes out of Xinjiang at scale?
So on country of origin at the moment, the tests are not conclusive, and therefore we use traceability more with our supply base. However, when we are made aware of an allegation like the BBC, or if we in our own supply chain have concerns, we would use... I didn't
understand that.
Apologies. So there are two different routes that you can use to try... Well, many different routes, actually, you can use to piece together the picture when you are confirming the country of origin of a product. The challenge that we have as an industry at the moment, and the scientific community would agree, is that the country of origin testing, because it is taking one particular product against one particular sample against a very large database of possible options, that is not conclusive by itself as to country of origin. It either gives you...
I'm completely agreeing again, but what I'm trying to understand is, say cotton or tomatoes, whether you are running a systematic process for all of your cotton products or all of your tomato products, default, not to get a perfect answer, because I understand you won't get a perfect answer, but it raises your level of certainty to then go and probe much more actively through other channels, such as your 3-hour checks or whatever. And what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is, are you taking that approach on, let's say, just cotton and tomatoes? Are you doing that in cotton? And are you doing that in tomatoes now?
So our approach would be the reverse of what you've described. So we would use our audits and we would use the data traceability to give us the initial read.
I apologise for interrupting, but time and everything else, so I'm not trying to be rude. But given we know that a lot of cotton comes out of Xinjiang and we know a lot of tomatoes comes out of Xinjiang, wouldn't it be safer to be saying, we don't want that in our supply chain if we're Tesco's, and therefore we are going to, by default, start running those checks all the time? Because if you really don't want it in your supply chain, then not doing it, starting at that point and working backwards, is going to get your results much quicker, if you actually want to get to the bottom of it.
So my personal perspective is that actually that level of testing is not the most practical solution and isn't actually going to get us to what you are desiring. However, I am in total agreement with you of what we need to continue doing is looking at how do we piece together the multiple different pieces of due diligence and the multiple different ways of due diligence, whether that's certification schemes, whether that's audits, whether that's data, whether that is surveillance testing, to give us confidence that we do not have Xinjiang products in our any Xinjiang product in our supply chain. What I would say is I am as disappointed as I think anybody in this committee to have heard the allegation. We have fully investigated. We haven't found conclusive evidence that there is Chinese tomatoes in that tomato paste. However, the judgment call I have made is that there were technical failings on that site, which meant I am not able to rule out or confirm definitively the risk of contamination, and therefore we have made the decision to exit that supplier site.
I guess another question on it. Just in terms of, by default, are you asking whether your cotton and tomatoes comes from China to all your suppliers?
So we have made it very clear to all of our suppliers that no cotton and no tomatoes can be sourced from Xinjiang. That is...
Okay, but sorry, that wasn't the question. The question was, are you asking by default all your cotton and tomato products, whether the product is got Chinese, not Xinjiang, cotton in it? Because at least what I'm trying to do is shrink the... So are you asking that question by default, given you're worried about Xinjiang?
So within our specifications, we actually will specify on each product where products are allowed to come from. So if I take the tomato paste as an example, that our Tesco own brand tomato paste is only allowed to contain tomatoes coming from Italy. And so that is very clear to that supplier that no tomatoes from China are allowed in that product, and we would have that for every single product that we source.
And cotton?
Again, we do not source any product from Xinjiang, and we are clear with our suppliers around that.
Will you always know whether your cotton comes from China?
Yes, we would know the source. We would know the source, the either individual region, if it is specified as one region, or the multiple different countries that we could source from.
Okay, Rosie Writing. No, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lorains, this is for you again. So as you'll be aware, Tesco's has been involved in a lawsuit since 2022 brought by migrant Burmese workers from a factory in Mascot. The workers' law firm, Leaday, stated Tesco's ought to have been responsibly aware of the factory's working conditions. So my question is, what checks were carried out in the onboarding process for the factory in May Day, and on that onboarding process, what risks were initially identified?
So our onboarding process for any supplier is they cannot supply Tesco without having had a technical audit, which includes ensuring compliance with the core parts of the ETI base code. And then in addition, if it is in a high-risk country, they have to have had a human rights audit. They cannot supply us until those audits have been completed and that any critical non-conformances have been closed down. Then in addition to that, we have a risk-based approach when it comes, and I've obviously already briefly outlined this to the committee, when it comes to our ongoing due diligence approach, and that may include things like audits and my own and our own business team visits, as well as worker voice due diligence training. If there is anything maybe specifically on that case of anything that we found, maybe I could follow up with the committee if that's okay, just on that specific audit. But I'm not aware, certainly for us to have continued supply or to have taken supply from that site, we would have gone through all those stages.
And how long is that initial audit stage? How long does that take?
So the actual audit is tailored depending on the site and what needs to be looked at. If I look at our human rights audits, just to give an example, they will include both visiting the site and expert worker interviews, but they'll also include visiting associated places like worker accommodation, if that's included. So they can be anywhere from sort of a day to 2 or 3 days, but it is very dependent and tailored to the particular piece we're looking at. The time period then from that audit to supply very much depends on what we find. So if the audit has no major issues, we would be able to move quite rapidly. If the audit has non-conformances, we would need the supplier to then act on those before any critical non-conformances before we move forward. So it depends on what if we were to find anything.
And the process of onboarding or exiting a factory within Tesco's, what department's responsible for this?
So my team, so I have a responsible sourcing director who sits within my team. I stand over all of the human rights and responsible sourcing, along with, as I've said, my broader responsibility. So my team would stand over the decision to exit or continue to suspend or continue to work with a supplier as they remediate issues in conjunction with our commercial teams. But if I may say as well, just to give the reassurance, all of our any critical breaches that we find are also escalated and reviewed with our Group Risk and Compliance Committee, which is chaired by our Group CEO. So there is ultimate visibility at the absolute top of our business as to any of these issues.
So the decision to onboard the factory in Mascot, was that driven by the commercial team or your team?
So what we have when we look at the onboarding of any supplier is we clearly...
But we're not talking about any supplier, we're talking about this one in particular that has been featured in the Leaday case and in the newspapers.
So apologies, the reason I am just taking a step back is it is the same for any supplier that we onboard and any site we onboard. We review the commercial part of the business.
So how did this go wrong?
So as I've said to your colleague, I would like to maybe just be able to write back to the committee with the specific elements of this case, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. But every supplier that we onboard, it is a joint commercial quality and human rights and responsible sourcing decision.
Does it start with the commercial side?
Apologies, could you maybe just explain the question?
So initial decision to start the onboarding process, does that start with the commercial side of the business?
So the bringing forward of a site for and a supplier for consideration would normally come from the product side of the business, because my team is not responsible for creating the products and finding suppliers to produce those products. So that sits as an accountability in the product in our commercial team. However, to be 100% clear, a supplier cannot supply Tesco unless they have had a technical audit, and if they are in a high-risk country, a human rights audit. And that doesn't matter how great a commercial product they have, however great a commercial partner they may be, they have to comply with our responsible sourcing requirements to be able to be a supplier of Tesco.
And since 2022, in the F&F clothing business, what have you done to make sure that garment manufacturing is done both safely and lawfully?
So since the VK Garments issue, which obviously we were made aware of in 2023, we continue to work with our suppliers in the way that I have described to the committee, and I know we are tight on time, so I don't want to repeat what I've already said, but it is very much about those initial onboarding checks. It is about continued rigour, and in our high-risk countries, our annual human rights audits, which look both at the site, at the surrounding worker environment, be that accommodation, and then in addition our ongoing due diligence, which would be our protector line, which I have spoken about, which would give any worker in those high-risk countries in our primary supplier sites the opportunity to raise concerns with us, even though they are not contracted directly through us, and at the same time then the enhancements on digital threat intelligence, which I've spoken to Mr. Byrne about.
Do you trust your current suppliers?
So I absolutely trust that we have our supply base are clear on our requirements, and we have many, many, many wonderful suppliers who we have worked with for many years.
A very political answer.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is, however, despite everything we do, and actually, what I have to take some comfort in is the fact that when I look at how Tesco is benchmarked by industry experts, our approach is held up very highly. The Know the Chain have put us as second out of 60 in their 2023 benchmark, which is all about how do you protect your supply chain and how do you remove forced labour from your supply chain. But despite everything that we do, unfortunately, there is a higher risk of human rights abuses in certain high-risk countries, and therefore I come to work and my team come to work every day to make sure that we are removing those instances and stopping those instances. But on the rare occasions when things like you have just described do happen, we are absolutely open to understanding those, rapidly investigating and understanding them, and then taking action and remediating and understanding the root cause. Because it is a global challenge and an industry challenge that we face, and by coming together both with the individual actions that we as Tesco are taking, but as industry and using our collective voice and our collective power, we are able to make a difference, and we will make a difference.
Matt Weston? Just briefly, Mr. Lorains. So when you have a factory that you contract to, say, in May's SOT, when you take on a contract with them to supply particular garments manufactured there, do your team go out there, personnel employed by Tesco PLC, go out there and establish the contract with them and do the checks, and then subsequently do the checks every year? That's Tesco employees.
So we have two different types of visit, I guess, that I would talk to the committee about. We have third-party audits, which are done by verified audit companies who we have a structured relationship with, exactly. And we manage in a very close way to make sure that they are reviewing to Tesco's requirements, and we have calibration sessions with them. We work very closely to make sure that
it's contracted out.
So we have third-party audits. And
I've established that. That's very clear. We're
could
very
I just
tight for time.
explain the other side in 30 seconds?
We just want to press this point, okay, if you don't mind.
I just want to go back. So it's very clear that you contract that out to an agency to do the checks subsequently to the establishment of the contract. when you establish a contract, I just want to be absolutely clear that when you set up that contract, it's set up by Tesco PLC staff going to Maysot, looking at the factory, looking at the working conditions and so on, and they are the ones that write and agree the contract with that business.
So if I may, I would say we don't contract out our audits. We have a very, very controlled set of audit service providers who we have a very...
They're not Tesco employees.
They are not Tesco employees, but they are trained to the standard that we would expect them to be. And that is in part due to the practicality of the number of sites we look at. We also...
When you're choosing those partners, what's the kind of universe of companies like that you choose from when you're sourcing these audit checking services?
So we look at the universe of audit service providers, but we continue to challenge ourselves to have a very small set of providers who we can have strategic relationships with. Yeah. We really want to have we want them to be an extension of the Tesco business.
I understand that. This is a really important strategic question for us. So what do you think that market of auditors is like? Is it good? Have you got a lot of choice?
So we work very closely, and we have actually a programme of our audit service provider selection, which goes through that broad market, because there is a broad market, to really look at who those few providers that we would work with. So we are pleased that today we have a small set of audit service providers who we work with. Clearly, in the case that you spoke to me about, there was an issue with an audit provider, and that is something that has been a key part of that complaint.
Rosie Writing, do you want to just pursue that?
Quick question: in the factory in Mayscott, did the buying or merchandising teams visit the factory close to the incident?
So I know our teams would have visited the factory. I would need to come back to you about how close to the incident.
Okay. And this contractor that you employ, it's a soulless contract with Tesco, or they do contracts for other companies?
So the audit service providers do work across multiple companies.
That's fine.
However, we have a direct specification with them, and it is a Tesco specific audit that we are asking them to do.
Understood. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Sonia Kumar.
Thank you. And staying with Tesco, in your most recent modern slavery statement, you have confirmed 2 to 4 instances of exploitation in the operations and around 15 in your supply chain. So 48% of your high-risk suppliers have had instances of labour market non-compliance. Is labour non-compliance part of your business model?
So absolutely not. We take human rights incredibly seriously, and hopefully, as I have maybe through my explanation of our processes and our approach, you can see how human rights is embedded from absolutely the bottom of our business all the way through to the top. If I may maybe comment on those 2 different data points that you raised, within our modern slavery report, we do explain that 48% of our sites last year had non-conformances. While every non-conformance is key and something that we will work with our suppliers over a very short time frame to resolve, the vast majority of those...
What time frame?
So for critical non-conformances, we would set 3 months, and for non-conformances, for minor and major non-conformances, we would set 6 months maximum. And that is in accordance, those classifications are in accordance with SMETA, who classify across a very, very broad set of human rights activities and factors, the spectrum of the audit. So yes, we do see that 48%. The very vast majority of those...
Staggering amount, 48%.
So it is a higher number than I would want it to be. It has been increasing, unfortunately, over the last few years.
Doesn't sound like you've got a grip on your compliance.
So if I look at what we do, we visit every supplier site in a high-risk country every year, and they have a human rights audit. The purpose of that audit is to look, as I said, at those very broad human rights factors and understand, is there anything that isn't delivering what we would expect? While, as I was saying, every part of non-compliance and non-conformance is incredibly important to me, and we work with our suppliers to close those down, the very vast majority of those numbers are what would be defined by SMETA as more ongoing things that need to be improved and can be improved very quickly. So they might be things like frequency of fire drills, absolutely essential, but something that we can work immediately with the supplier and say, actually, you need to increase that. The most severe instances that we are talking about at the committee are those small one is too many, and let me be very clear, but they are the much smaller number of those numbers that you raised, around the 15 in our supply chain and the 2 in our, and partial 2 in our own operations, where we did substantiate claims of forced labour. And as I said, 1 is too many for me. We take every allegation incredibly seriously. We fully investigate. But what I did want to make clear to the committee is there is a distinction between the different types of non-conformances and issues that we are finding.
Just want to follow up with Mr. Macrow. Unlike Tesco, you do not publish any findings from your due diligence in your modern slavery statement. Why do you not publish the results?
I must admit, I don't have an answer to that question. It's not something I've stopped and considered. We have a modern day slavery statement which we comply with, and I haven't considered beyond that. I'm happy to take that away and look into it further.
Would you be happy to provide a statement with us?
So would I be happy
to? Would you be happy to provide a statement afterwards with the results?
Certainly we can get back in touch and let you know. I'm sorry, I don't think I properly understand your question.
So with Tesco, obviously they have their statement. You have not published your findings and the results of the findings. So I'm asking you whether you can supply that to us.
So Tesco's will publish a statement, do their due diligence, publish the findings of the due diligence. You publish a statement, but don't publish anything beyond that. So we're interested in why you don't publish the results of your due diligence work. No doubt you'll have done due diligence work on your supply chains. We're just interested in why you don't.
So talking about this, sorry, I'm not a supply chain expert. So let me explain what I can about the supply chain, and perhaps we can refer you to my supply chain experts to follow up subsequent to the meeting. We have a very strict set of global standards that have to be adhered to by all of our suppliers. In this country, we have a large but not very complex supply chain. We buy 2.4 billion worth of UK product, but that's just through 75 suppliers, and those suppliers are governed by our agreement. We audit them through an external company every year to the SMETA standards, as well as managing with our own team, who also visit them and conduct at least one business review with everyone each year. We have a team of 26 people managing that group of 75 suppliers, and the vast majority, a lot of them have been with us for many, many years, more than 20 years, so we know them very well. So we do understand those suppliers, very well. So I certainly am happy to put you in touch with my supply chain team expert, or our global team, in fact, for more broader sourcing questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Antonia Vance.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Opie, for your patience. This one is for you, if you would like to lead off. So, in the Employment Rights Bill, the government proposes the creation of a new Fair Work Agency. Would be interested in your thoughts about what the government needs to do to make sure that it protects the most vulnerable workers, both here in the UK and abroad.
Thanks for the question. We supported the Fair Work Agency, and we've actually written to the Minister just to confirm not only our support for it, but we'd like to see the detail of how it's actually going to implement it work and go as far as it possibly can. We do like the idea of the coordination of the various agencies coming together. We think that's the most effective area. We have a couple of things we'd like the government to consider in terms of going further than that it's kind of suggested, at least at the moment. The first is to be clear of the powers of the Fair Work Agency in terms of the interventions it can make. So the GLAA focus at the moment is primarily around modern slavery cases, for example, whereas we think human rights issues in the supply chain should also be an issue of focus for them. We'd also like the Fair Work Agency to be able to look at recruitment agencies that operate outside the UK. So, for example, Claire mentioned the potential problems that we've identified with our work with members on the seasonal workers task force, which we've shared with government. One of those is the recruitment agencies operating in countries outside Europe who are sending workers into the UK scheme where we feel they are fairly charging those workers for various expenses before they come into the UK, and some of those workers are already coming in as bonded workers in effect. So I think it's really key that whatever the powers it has are both sufficient to deal with the powers the GLA already has in its regulated sectors, but also can go further both here in the UK and abroad to tackle workers who are being sent into particularly seasonal worker roles here in the UK. The final thing, just picking up on something that was said earlier, we thought would be a really good role for this agency would be to look at modern slavery statements. It may surprise you, but since 2015, when the Act came in, we're told that there are still thousands of businesses who aren't even publishing a statement, let alone the efficacy of those statements. And we think this agency could look at that, but also be given powers to intervene if they think that statement is insufficient or if that statement is not being prepared in the first place.
Thank you. And do you, we've heard that in the resources available for enforcement in this country are not adequate and don't meet international standards. I wondered if you had a comment on resourcing.
Absolutely. I mean, we worked very hard with the government of the time in 2015. We actually wanted the Modern Slavery Act to go further than it went originally. For example, we would have liked the threshold for businesses covered to be lower, to cover more businesses. It's interesting. We gave evidence to the House of Lords. Review of modern slavery last year, for example, agreed pretty much with every recommendation they made in their report, which the government has just responded to, around the public sector, for example, also be included in the Modern Slavery Act as well. So the resource issue, if you look at the amount of work we would like that agency to do, is large. I think but we're not talking about huge sums of money here. I think for the GLAA, if you were to treble its budget, you're probably going from about 8 million to 24 million pounds a year. We are talking about relatively small sums in the scheme of things, but they could play such an important role. The responsibility will always sit on the retailers, and we've heard from two retailers, but from my position at the BRC, can I tell you, this challenge is a challenge faced by every retailer, every public sector procurement business out there, to try and eradicate human rights abuses in their supply chains. And therefore, with a little bit of support from government, combined with pressure on businesses to do everything they can, we do feel we can make a big difference in this area.
Sonia Kumar.
Just to follow on from there, what improvements would you like to see to the Modern Slavery Act? And that's sort of everybody.
Shall I
start straight?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we should start with actually enforcing what's already there. The scrutiny currently of statements is woeful, frankly, and it should improve, and the government should really be looking to, identify those companies certainly who aren't preparing statements, but also through better guidance also be clear on what is expected in the statements themselves. I think going to the next stage, and
just before you move off that point, is there a risk that we put through the Employment Rights Bill, strengthen labour standards here in the UK, but the risk of labour abuse just gets offshored?
Absolutely. The one thing that's missing in this bill is to tackle both the Modern Slavery Act conditions and all the issues around the Fair Work Agency. The Modern Slavery Act is still sitting with the Home Office, who are still looking at possible changes going forward next year. To us, it would have made much more sense to have all of this wrapped up together. Sorry,
please continue. Yes, if there's
I was just going to finish on. We touched upon it before. We would like the government to really regain its progressive approach to modern slavery. We think we had that in 2015. We were one of the first countries to go. We've done very little with the Modern Slavery Act since 2015, either in guidance or support or challenge. So we would like it to start looking at issues about mandatory human rights due diligence, for example. Should that be required for companies to put forward? We're seeing that in Europe. There's some really progressive legislation. The new EU directive, which will come in shortly, requires that from businesses. We don't understand why the UK wouldn't want to go down the same route as that, particularly as we are tackling global supply chains here. And the way you tackle global supply chains is through collaboration and global companies and businesses getting together, send the right signals to the market that every supplier, whether it's in China or India or Bangladesh, is doing the same thing, because they know without doing that they cannot get onto these really high value markets. So aligning ourselves through that with these other countries, through the EU or some of the work that's already seen in America and individual countries like Germany would be a really powerful tool for doing that as well.
I would just agree with what Mr. Opie has said. I think they would be our key areas, and if I could just, I suppose, reinforce, I think for the UK to remain competitive, being aligned to some of the more progressive steps forward that are happening in the EU, particularly around the corporate sustainability due diligence directive, is essential. And also for me, it gives me hope that it is a precursor to global standards, and which will help us tackle the challenges that we've spoken about today.
You must worry about bad competitors undercutting you by offshoring labour abuse if we don't make these changes.
So I feel as a business, my responsibility is to listen to my customers, and I know that our customers want products that are safe, legal, are great quality, and are sustainably and responsibly sourced, and they ask us to do that. However, I do believe that legislation plays one very critical part in levelling the playing field, and therefore I do think my ask to government would be there is a role to help all of us in the UK deliver better human rights for the workers in our supply chain, and make sure that the UK is progressive in that thinking, but that we move forward as an industry.
Can I just add one thing to that? There's actually an onshoring potential to this as well. Yeah. We have fashion retailers in particular who would love to source more manufactured garments here in the UK. We have really struggled to tackle some of the human rights abuses in our own supply chains here, and that is actually putting off companies, fashion retailers here, sourcing more in the UK. If we had greater powers, greater demonstration of enforcement, they would bring supply back to the UK. So there's a really positive issue around development here within the UK if we get this right. We would have fashion retailers. We know that. We spoke to various mayors about 3 or 4 years ago to try and get off the ground. We never got it off the ground because we couldn't get the assurances on labour enforcement. So there is a real potential for the UK.
Mr. Macrow, what's your perspective on this?
I think Mr. Opie has represented the industry incredibly well. I've got nothing further to add to that.
Okay. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a mention there of American standards, and the US reviewed its treaty with Canada and Mexico, the USMCA, to allow goods to be stopped at the US border if there were questions about labour standards. Is that something that the UK should be looking at in our new trade deal? Should we have built into that the ability to stop goods if there is a suspicion that they have come from areas where standards have not been met?
I think there should be the potential to look at all of these issues. We've not spoken, for example, around trade policy here, what our trade policy is in terms of how we ensure that workers in countries that we are importing from are also protected. And I know the government made a statement in the House of Lords response around Australia and the New Zealand deals, for example, but I think it should be more of a part. Now, I think there are other powers that might come before that, which would be examination of due diligence, which then also takes directors of those businesses and the businesses itself to task if they're not doing it. The second thing you could do, which is in the EU legislation, which is around remediation for workers who might be affected, being paid directly through civil penalties of the businesses that have caused that by not following their own due diligence. So I think there is a suite of measures out there that the government could look at. I think they're probably on an escalation where maybe stopping goods at the border is probably at the end of that, but there are definitely more things that the government could do to intervene here.
Mr. Maynard?
It's restricted visas. Thank you, Chair.
Very briefly.
Restricted visas. How much trouble? I mean, you were quick out of the gate to flag about seasonal worker scheme, and whether it's people working in the fields or people working in people's houses, this is a high risk area. How would you most like to see that reformed?
I think we've given government a number of measures that we think would help secure those schemes. So if you're talking about things like seasonal workers scheme, which allocates, I forget how many tens of thousands permits a year.
40,000.
Yeah, but those should be underpinned by very clear conditions of how those labour providers are bringing workers into the country and how those visas are used. Because there are both issues about bringing workers in and then how those workers are treated within the UK in terms of maybe being moved from farm to farm or processing plant to processing plant without necessarily them wanting to move there. So we have shared through our Seasonal Worker Task Force, which includes some of the anti-slavery NGOs, the farmers themselves, ourselves, a number of recommendations through the Seasonal Workers Task Force to the government, which we feel would make a big difference to really give everybody the confidence. I think the flip side for the farmers, because these workers are absolutely crucial to UK production, is they then get certainty on the visa scheme. So instead of maybe renewing it every 1 or 2 years, they would know that if these conditions are met, and this is the labour market that we anticipate, these are the number of visas we will have for the next 5 years minimum.
Okay. Mr. Lorains, Mr. Macrow, any observations on trade policy, the use of something like USMCA mechanisms to stop bad goods at the border?
I was just going to maybe make 2 very quick points. So I would be very supportive, as Mr. Opie has said, around bad goods, the changes and the review of bad goods at the border. The other piece I would add is I think if the UK isn't progressive in this, we do, and by the way, that this is in line with Tesco's policies, what we are talking about. I think we are at risk of the UK potentially becoming a dumping ground for products that then can't enter the EU and can't enter the US. And I think it would be a real pity if we ever ended up with that being the situation we find ourselves in.
Literally, I just want to underline this, you think the UK could become a dumping ground for second-class products if we don't reform?
I think there is a risk that if our policies are behind those of Europe and of America, that creates a gap, and that creates an ability for things to enter the UK market that aren't entering other markets.
The country that led the abolition of slavery could actually be one of the countries that sustains labour abuse around the world.
I believe as the UK labour market, we have such a position to drive forward labour standards across the globe, and I would be delighted to see us continue to take a leading position there and really be able to drive those, hopefully in the future, global standards that start to eradicate some of the risks we have talked about today.
Anything to add to that, Mr. Macrow?
Nothing to add.
I'm sorry we overran, but that's been an incredibly important set of evidence from you. We're really grateful for you spending the time in the preparation to join us this afternoon, and there'll be a few follow-up bits of correspondence, and we'll be grateful for your cooperation for that. But for now, that concludes this panel. Order, order. Thank you very much indeed, folks.
Thank you.
We're going to go live in 5. Order, order. Welcome to the second panel of our first session of 2025, looking at the Employment Rights Bill and industrial relations in the UK. We are incredibly grateful to you for joining us from SHEIN and from Temu this afternoon to give us evidence. Ms. Zhu, perhaps I could just start the questioning with your good self. Could you just tell us, do you source cotton from China?
So SHEIN is a company originated and developed in China, leveraging the Chinese supply chain. We have since grown into a global business with presence in over 150 countries.
But do you source cotton from China today?
So our suppliers, we do not obviously own any manufacturing facilities. Mm-hmm. We work with a wide network of suppliers. Our contract manufacturers, we have manufacturers in China, in Brazil, in Turkey, and we're obviously looking at the other potential supply chain.
In the products that you ship, there is cotton from China?
Like I mentioned, the suppliers we work with, they are based in China, in Turkey, and Brazil. Yeah. And obviously, many of them are in China.
Okay, this isn't a trick question. It's not a complicated question. In the products that you ship, will there be cotton from China?
So the suppliers we work with, most of them, they're based in regions...
It's actually a yes or no question, actually. Do you think that there is cotton from China in the products that you ship? Yes or no?
My understanding, and also, Chair, with all due respect, well as I understand that today's discussion is about international supply chain and upholding labour rights and standards, I can only answer questions as far as my position and responsibility relates to. So I'll do the best I can to answer your questions. To the extent there are details that I'm not able to provide, if you would allow me, we can provide written response after the hearing.
Right, okay. But the first question is there cotton from China in the goods that you sell?
Chair, thank you again for your patience. With all due respect, may I please ask for permission to be able to write to you about the further questions you may have?
You can't tell the committee today whether there is cotton from China in the products that SHEIN sells.
What I'm able to share with the committee, obviously we comply with laws and regulations everywhere we do business in the world. And we have supplier code of conduct, we have robust systems and procedures in place and policies in place. And we also have very strong enforcement measures in place to ensure we adhere to these high standards that are expected in our supply chain. And we take these.
You can't tell the committee today whether there is cotton from China in the products that you sell.
As mentioned, Chair, with all due respect, for detailed operational information and other aspects I'm not able to assist, I will have to write back to the committee afterwards.
Are you able to tell us whether there is any cotton from Xinjiang in the products that you sell?
Similarly, I believe that's a similar question to the previous one just asked, so we are going to have to write to the committee afterwards.
Okay, you can't tell me definitively today whether the products that you sell contains any cotton from Xinjiang.
Thank you again for your patience. I am going to apologise for having to repeat again. If you would allow me, we'll write to the committee afterwards. Okay.
Is it your company's view that there is forced labour in Xinjiang in China?
Again, back to the agenda of the committee, as I understand it, we're looking at upholding standards.
The agenda for the committee is, as I set out, what the agenda is. And the question is, does your company fear that there is forced labour in Xinjiang?
I'm only able to answer the questions that are relating to our business.
You cannot tell me whether SHEIN fears there is forced labour in Xinjiang?
As mentioned, I don't think it's our place to comment on just having a geopolitical debate. My responsibility
geopolitical
here,
debate, it's a question of fact.
I am only able to answer questions as they are related to our business.
Okay, but if your business is sourcing product from Xinjiang, then you ought to know whether there are risks of forced labour in your products.
If you would allow me, I can explain a little bit about our business. Our business obviously is about...
We'll get into that, don't worry. Let me just follow that question up, though, to ask, do you think that there is a problem with due diligence for investigating human rights in Xinjiang?
Again, if there is a specific question about our business and how we do supply chain due diligence, I'm happy to explain here to the committee how we carry out a supply chain due diligence, if I may.
Okay.
So we have supplier code of conduct and responsible sourcing standards, and all of these documents are publicly available on our website. But not only, so the contract manufacturers that SHEIN works with, they're required to sign up to these standards, but not only they need to sign up, they need to fully understand the importance of the issue. So we run hundreds of trainings every year with the suppliers, and we have a robust system in place. We carried out close to 4,000 audits. 92% of these were carried out by third-party, internationally verified agencies, and such as SGS, Intertek, OpenView, Bureau Veritas. These audits are indeed intended to ensure the robustness of our supply chain and labour rights protection. When these are conducted, the agencies are particularly vigilant on forced labour and child labour issues, and they work with an over 140-item comprehensive checklist.
And on that checklist, does that include any prohibitions on using cotton that is sourced in Xinjiang?
What I'm able to explain in terms of due diligence process, and the list is we have immediate termination violations and also immediate remediation violations. The forced labour and child labour and ethical issues such as bribery or integrity issues such as trying to avoid audits, these are all immediate termination violations, while as in immediate remediation violations, that includes, for example, preventing the workers from unionizing or joining a union, or having poor unsafe working condition, or having significant negative environmental impact, so on.
But you don't prohibit suppliers from sourcing cotton in Xinjiang? So that's on that 140-point checklist that you just referred to. One of those 140 points isn't, you shall not buy cotton from Xinjiang.
As I was trying to describe, the policies and generally the position is we comply with laws and regulations in all the countries that we do business as they're applicable to us. So the audits are obviously carried out in order to ensure that. Okay.
Again, maybe this is a simple yes or no, but in your 140-point checklist, do you prohibit your suppliers from sourcing cotton in Xinjiang?
Chair, and as I don't directly work on the audit, whilst I understand your question, I understand the importance of the work of the committee, I'm going to have to ask for permission to write back to you on this.
Okay. In November 2023, Auditing found that just under 2% of SHEIN's cotton tested positive for unapproved cotton. Can you tell us what the figure was for the last month for which you have data?
Unfortunately, as I'm not directly responsible for that area, and I do not have information on this.
Okay. If we write to you, are you able to supply that information?
I'm going to have to check internally whether the information is available.
Okay. You are seeking a listing, and it is said that you may be seeking to list on the London Stock Exchange. Is that true?
Again, I'm not able to comment on any IPO speculation. It's not.
Okay. Why did you cease work on seeking a listing on the New York Stock Exchange?
I'm not able to comment on any IPO related. It's not my remit to.
It was reported that SHEIN sought permission of the China Securities Regulatory Commission to list in the UK or the US. So why would you need Chinese government permission to list in either America or Britain if you're a company headquartered in Singapore?
Sorry, Chair, I am not able to comment on because I'm not close to the details of the news report that you just mentioned.
Okay, so you can't tell us anything about listing, you can't tell us anything about cotton in SHEIN products, and you can't tell us much, in fact. Okay, we're going to go to Antonia Vance.
Thank you very much. So the solicitors company Lead A are acting for Stop Uyghur Genocide, and they recently sent managers at SHEIN a dossier setting out likely forced labour abuses in the SHEIN supply chain in Xinjiang. They sent it in August 2024. Now, I've read the dossier, the committee have had the dossier, and it is appalling. Under the UK's Proceeds of Crime Act, it is an offence to profit from goods that, if produced in the UK, would break the Modern Slavery Act. Now, I understand that the dossier was sent to you earlier this month on the 3rd of January via hard copy and email. Have you seen that letter and dossier from Lead A, and would you like to take the opportunity to respond to its contents?
Thank you for the question. I have received the letter and the materials attached to the letter. We take these type of issues that are raised or concerns raised very seriously, so we have reviewed them in full. Whilst the content of the materials are about international supply chain risks in general, it's not specifically relating to the SHEIN business. We have obviously reviewed it. We, as I mentioned a little earlier, the key principle is that we comply with the laws and regulations in all the countries that we operate in. As you kindly mentioned, because we operate in the UK, we indeed comply with the UK laws as well.
Okay, thank you. And I understand you're a solicitor registered and regulated in England and Wales. Given that individuals can be prosecuted under the Proceeds of Crime Act, are you comfortable that no criminal liability attaches to you yourself now that you've seen the dossier?
As mentioned, I have reviewed the documents and the materials that have been sent to us, and we have obviously experts who work in this area as well. We have reviewed in full. This is about international supply chain risks in general, not about SHEIN specifically.
But in November 2022, Bloomberg found the presence of cotton from Xinjiang in garments sold by SHEIN on 2 occasions. Are you still using cotton from Xinjiang?
I think in answering a similar question earlier to the chair, our position is the most important principle for us is we comply with the laws and regulations in the countries that we operate in.
And you're confident you're in compliance with the UK Modern Slavery Act?
Our position is we are compliant with relevant UK laws.
Where's your voice?
Just a couple of questions to understand your level of visibility of your supply chain. So, what do you have factories in China?
So, yeah, perhaps it's if it's helpful, I'll just
take a suppliers.
Step. Yeah, take a step back. So we do not. It's not vertically integrated. So we do not own any factories or manufacturing facilities. But
I'm aware,
we work with a large network of suppliers.
Have suppliers that make SHEIN clothing in China?
Yes.
Do you know what regions in China?
So, as I mentioned earlier, obviously China is, we leverage the Chinese supply chain. It's a country we have very significant operations in.
Do you know what regions you leverage?
So our contract manufacturers are generally concentrated in the regions where the country or as a whole, where they have more capability in the fashion manufacturing sector.
Yeah, and do you know what regions they are?
That would include South China, for example, Guangdong Province, and East China, Zhejiang Province, North China, Liaoning Province, Central China, Hunan Province, and so on. There are quite
China?
a lot of...
You mentioned every other point. What about West China?
There are... in West China, I think in Guizhou Province, for example...
Guizhou is in West China? Southwest China?
We'll come to you in a moment, but Mr. Writing has the floor.
And similarly, because this level of, because I personally have visited some of the suppliers, I'm able to, based on the information I have, share these. But I think that's perhaps, not to avoid giving committee incorrect information or incomplete information, if you would allow me, I can write to the committee afterwards.
Yeah, no, we would like you to definitely write to us. It's just, I'm trying to understand how you can lay out the regions that you're using in China, but you're unable to lay out if any cotton is being manufactured in China for your SHEIN products. It's not adding up.
Mr. Maynard, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I don't think you're respecting the committee at all. So I'm on your website, and I can see about 20 products which are all cotton, which I've just searched under cotton, and yet you say to our chair that you can't state whether SHEIN is selling any products which are made in China, which are made of cotton. I find that completely ridiculous. And I find it very unhelpful and disrespectful that you're here doing this. You mention every other spot of the compass, but you don't mention West China, apart from, I think it was Guiyang or Guizhou, which is in southwest China. You don't mention Xinjiang at all. And it's willful ignorance.
Come to a question.
And well, I'm asking you whether you think you are being disrespectful by being so blankly void of answers.
Thank you for your question, and with due respect, I am doing the best I can to answer the questions the committee has.
I'm interrupting, but I disagree that you are doing the best you can. You're not. You're not giving us straight answers.
I am giving the answers to the best of my ability, and
that is not true. That is simply not true. We have asked you some very, very, very simple questions, and you are not giving us straight answers. And that, I find, dismisses the point of why we are here today. Do you understand how simple the questions we are asking you are? Do any of your products, do they have cotton from China? That is not difficult.
I understand the question, and I believe in earlier questions and answers I have answered to the best of my ability and offered on the questions I'm unable to answer today.
Okay, I will park it. I will say that you have not answered to the best of your ability and you've obfuscated willfully.
Okay, Mr. Weston?
I'm just interested on the point that my colleague was asking in terms of audit. And like any brand, you will want to ensure that there is good quality product coming out with the label SHEIN on it. So does the company visit the factories, contracted factories that make SHEIN clothing? Yes or no?
So the auditors, the external auditors we engage, they do visit the
employees of SHEIN.
They're not employees of SHEIN. Of course, there are SHEIN employees that visit the factories, but we don't want to just mark our own homework. We engage verified external auditors to do the on-site audits.
And as part of that quality audit, would your auditors ask about the source of the materials that they're using to ensure the consistency of the product output?
So my understanding is, as I mentioned, there is this the over 140 items checklist, so they will follow the checklist and issue reports accordingly. As perhaps mentioned earlier, if we need more details on the audits and the items they check in the audits, that's something, level of information we will have to provide afterwards.
Okay, Mr. Cooper.
A question for both Temu and SHEIN. First of all, do you both stand by your 2024 modern slavery statements?
I think the modern slavery statements we issued in 2024 is in relation to year 2023, yes.
Okay. And you're both happy to stand by those, yes? And then one for Temu specifically then, in that 2024 modern slavery statement, it states that you conduct comprehensive risk assessment to your supply chains to, quote, identify and mitigate potential risks of modern slavery. What do those risk assessments involve and why are they not published?
So first and foremost, if we could just provide for a brief moment some background on the business model of Temu, that will help to put this question in context. Thank you very much to the committee for giving us the opportunity to speak here today. We at Temu are a marketplace that connects third-party sellers with consumers to provide them with high-quality goods at affordable prices. The sellers on our platform offer over 200 different product categories. Apparel is one of those categories, and to give you an example, less than 1% of the products sold on our platform to UK users, for example, contain cotton. And thirdly, we're strongly committed.
Can you say that again?
Less than 1% of the products sold on our platform to UK users contain cotton, by way of example. And thirdly, we're strongly committed to the UK market. We see the UK market as a market in which we can grow. The sellers who operate on our platform can prosper and they can do business. By the end of 2025, for example, we're committed to having at least 50% of the sellers who sell on our platform to be physically based and registered in the UK. And we see that as an achievable goal, and a goal that we're working strenuously towards.
Okay, so back to my original question though about risk assessments. What risk assessments do you undertake? What do you do? Do you go to these suppliers? Do you look at these things? How do you make sure that you are compliant with that modern slavery statement? Then how do you achieve that?
Yeah, perhaps I could use this opportunity to walk the committee through the compliance program that we have in place today. So our compliance is an integral part of how we operate at Temu. The compliance program that we have in place rests on two pillars: policies and processes. The Modern Slavery Act statement that you referenced is one such policy. We have other policies. We have implemented a human rights policy that is oriented around internationally recognized standards, such as the United Nations Guiding Principles on Businesses and Human Rights. We also have a third-party code of conduct that is a binding agreement between us and all the third parties, such as the traders that we do business with. And that specifically sets out that these traders have to adhere to ethical labor practices and specifically prohibits forced labor. We put these policies into practice, complement them by a number of compliance processes. These processes take effect across different stages and work together to ensure the compliance of our platform. The first stage is the onboarding stage. So a trader who's seeking to do business on Temu has to pass through an onboarding process. As part of this process, we require from that trader detailed information about their business, such as business registration documents, identifying information about key representatives, financial information about the intended scope and nature of the activities on our platform. We check this information through industry standard tools such as the LexisNexis World Compliance Database, which includes sanctions lists on politically exposed persons and other similar lists. And only traders who pass through this process are then allowed to do business on our platform. Similarly, we have a process in place before a product can be listed that product needs to pass through. As part of this process, we require from the trader to submit information about the product, including any compliance-related information such as applicable certificates and other requirements. Only when this information is provided in full is that product allowed to be sold on our platform. Our compliance process does not stop there. We monitor our platform both with regards to the traders and the product on an ongoing basis by using automated solutions to ensure ongoing compliance. We also provide to consumers a dedicated reporting channels through which they can share with us concerns about traders or products on our platform. We review all such reports and take appropriate action on them. And I would also like to mention that we provide our traders with extensive training and educational materials through a dedicated portal that allows them to further their compliance efforts. So this is the compliance program that we have in place today. Again, these different measures that I mentioned work together to ensure compliance on our platform. Especially as a young company, we launched in September 2022. We're fully cognizant and realistic about the complexities of global supply chains, which is an issue that applies across our industry. We're committed to continuously improving our compliance program. And I would like to mention that we're at the moment undertaking an industry-leading initiative whereby we will require and make mandatory for all traders on our platform to disclose the origin of manufacturing of their products. And this information will be made available to consumers on our website. And this again, is an industry-leading initiative that we're undertaking on a voluntary basis, and I hope this demonstrates our commitment to compliance and to ensuring a trustworthy and transparent shopping experience for consumers.
Thank you for that. And that point you're making there laterally, I mean, that then would allow consumers certainly to take a decision, but it wouldn't necessarily stop you selling that product. You would simply offer that product and say it contains items from wherever. It's up to you as a consumer then.
I think it's important to say that the onboarding processes that I described, such as through which we check information from the traders against, for example, the World Compliance Database and the sanctions list contained therein, those apply to all traders. The information that we're disclosing additionally on our website, that's something that furthers consumers' transparency, but it does not change or affect the compliance checks that we have in place that apply to all traders before they can even do business on our platform.
Thank you. And if I can just turn back to cotton, Mr. Heary mentioned cotton there, and it's a relatively small part of your business. You say, although you are a very large business, so 1% of a very large business might involve quite a lot of cotton. There was a report earlier this year from the US website, The Information, and it said that managers at factories that make apparel claim that Temu were encouraging them to continue using cotton from China. Have you a response to that allegation?
I can't speak to this specific article that you're mentioning. If you'd like to share details, I would be happy to look into it. But what I can say is that any issues of labour practices and problematic labour practices are something that we take fundamentally very seriously. Forced labour, for example, is an issue that is a core priority for senior leadership all the way down and across the organisation as well. So, sorry if you repeat.
It was a specific allegation that there was pressure from your company to continue using cotton from China. So you're not able to address that specific example, you don't think?
I can't, I'm afraid, address the specific question. I'm not familiar with the article that you're mentioning.
Thank you.
So, as you understand it today, are there retailers on your platform that are selling products from Xinjiang?
So we strive to adhere to achieve compliance with laws in all of the markets in which we operate.
You would expect nothing less.
We have taken on board the feedback of stakeholders and consumers, and we do not permit sellers from the Xinjiang region to sell products on Temu.
Sonia Human.
Going back to SHEIN, you said you do site visits, is that correct? For your manufacturing sites, is that correct?
So particularly the auditors, they would do on-site audits.
Have you done any visits?
I have visited, yes.
Okay, that's good. So when you've gone to visit, what products have been in those manufacturing sites?
Garments, like clothing.
Okay, so can you tell me what type of clothings?
Perhaps a variety of clothings, usually, because depending on the size of the facilities, could be many things that is happening.
Could you give me an example of something you've seen?
Sure. I mean, I can't remember exactly. There's just a lot of clothing being manufactured.
Okay, so you have seen some clothes being manufactured. You can't say that it's cotton or not cotton or anything in the product itself.
Yeah, like I said, I'm only able to see clothing being manufactured, and there could be different types.
Okay, so I'll move on. In the latest sustainability and social impact report, you reported 2 cases of child labour in your supply chain. How confident are you that your supply chain is child labour free?
Thank you. That's a very, very important question, and indeed it's a very serious issue. So with respect to those, well, I guess it's not just about those 2 suppliers, it's about preventing child labour in the supply chain in general. First of all, I think it's important to stress that not only we work with the suppliers to prevent that and take remediation actions, we've also tightened the policy. So previously, the policy was on immediate remediation violations, but now child labour since October 2023 is one of the immediate termination violations. Not only that, we have programs in place to help to educate the suppliers. There are training programs, there are notification being put out, but also have more robust system, help them to have more robust system internally to help to prevent that. It is also worth highlighting, while as the child labour as a definition in different countries, the laws might be different, but the standards in our policy is 16 years old, which is higher than the International Labour Organization standards.
How many suppliers have you now terminated a contract because there's been a suspicion or there has been evidence of child labour in that supply chain?
I'm really sorry because that's actually quite granular level of details. I do not have the specific information on how many suppliers have been terminated, but what I know, as mentioned, is one is it's an immediate termination violation now. By saying that, we also have a responsible exit program, i.e. we do not just terminate the suppliers, we do an impact assessment. We look at how much SHEIN's business is to that supplier, how many people they employ, and we'll help to ensure there's a smooth transition if they are terminated.
Can you provide the committee with some evidence of places or people that companies that you've been working with that haven't worked well and because of child labour, because you said you're collecting this data, so can you present that data to us?
I'm able to check, because I understand the question is how many suppliers we have terminated for child labour issues, and I can certainly check on that data. But I think it's also important just to know there is a robust system, because it's not just about one or two suppliers, it's about systematically ensure this does not happen again.
And the cases that you agree that they've been, how long was child labour continuing in that service?
I will have to double check on that level of detailed information. My understanding, at least, is the first of all, both the underage labour, I would say, they are 15 years old and 9 months or 11 months respectively. And my understanding is there was, not being either the ID paperwork or whatever, there's a mix-up. Therefore, when it has been identified, within a few days, the arrangement has been put in place to ensure all the remediation actions were taken.
Would you be able to supply that to us if that's okay?
Yeah.
You're saying it's only a couple of days that child labour was taking place?
I don't know how many days that they have been working in the factory. I don't have that level of granular details, but I can certainly check. Sorry, just for logistical question, would I be liaising with the clerk afterwards about the follow-ups?
Don't worry, we know where to find you. We will write to you. Anything further? No. Or is he writing briefly?
Thank you. You've both in the previous questions you've spoke about your suppliers or your retailers. How confident are you, or how much detail do you know about your suppliers or retailers outsourcing to smaller suppliers and smaller retailers? And the audits that you conduct, do they audit these outsourced factories? For both, so whoever would. Yeah, if we want to start with SHEIN.
Okay. So for the suppliers, generally, I don't think they systematically outsource as a starting point. And we do work with many small to medium-sized suppliers.
So when you say they don't systematically outsource as a starting point, can you confirm what that means?
Just to answer the question, because I think there as you mentioned, you're saying, are we checking where they outsource to? So I believe my understanding is there's limited outsourcing. The suppliers themselves, generally, they are already, because I think the second question was more about they're outsourcing to smaller businesses. I think to begin with, many of the suppliers, they are small to medium businesses. We work with them, we have worked with them over the years to ensure robust systems are in place, they're trained. We, out of all the, close to 4,000 audits that have been conducted, there are over 600 audits are indeed around upstream suppliers or packaging suppliers, or in the occasional sort of contract, as you mentioned, like outsource, perhaps equivalent. There is a level of audit there. I understand.
Sorry, just to come back to the question. So, do you believe that your suppliers are outsourcing their manufacturing?
As mentioned, I don't know to what extent, there is the outsourcing. My understanding is generally when we contract with them, they are the one who's producing the products that we order from them.
You could onboard and audit a factory, but they could go on to use another factory and you wouldn't know. And you
I think they would have their upstream suppliers, for example, either packaging or material and so on. What I was trying to say is we audit some of those as well. Now, I understand it's an industry-wide challenge as to how far you go on the supply, on the entire level of supply chain, how many levels removed. We require all the suppliers, first of all, they to comply with our supplier code of conduct, but also whoever they buy things from as well. And I think it is worth taking a step back just to say the supply chain due diligence is not, at the moment, in many countries, a mandatory obligation. What we do is trying to already meet high international standards, and we voluntarily carry out these regular audits and this level of supply chain due diligence.
Okay, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. SHEIN's supplier code of conduct says that suppliers are told they need to arrange working hours responsibly. What does that mean?
I think working hours and pay and so on, they're all part of the supplier code of conduct, and it's very important for the suppliers to adhere to whatever the legal requirements.
What do you mean when you say to arrange working hours responsibly? What does it mean?
All the working hours need to comply with the laws and regulations where the suppliers are based, and also they need to be compensated and paid appropriately.
How many hours a week do you think is an appropriate number for a shop floor worker at a supplier for SHEIN?
I don't think it's for me to judge what's appropriate. What we're saying is
you are the General Counsel for Europe, the Middle East, and the whole of Africa. So I probably would say it probably is appropriate in your elevated senior position within the organisation to make comment on what an appropriate. Would you say 50 hours a week is?
I think in different countries there are different maximum hour and rest period and so on, detailed provisions, and the laws do vary in different countries, and there are also International Labour Organization standards. So what we require the suppliers to do is to comply with our code of conduct and policies, and also to ensure they comply with the local laws as applicable.
So in 2022, a Channel 4 investigation found that a manufacturer being used by SHEIN in China had employees working 18-hour days with 1 day off a month. And in May of last year, a BBC report, a fresh report, found that some workers were still working 75 hours a week. Is that appropriate? And do you think those two specific instances agree with your supplier code of conduct?
I don't recognise the specifics of those what you just described. As mentioned, the working hours and the overtime and the rest, those are all set out as requirements for the suppliers to adhere to, and it's definitely part of what's being audited. And for suppliers, I believe there are suppliers that had been terminated due to a combination of factors, including excessive overtime.
You talk about suppliers being terminated then, and you made comment to supplier termination, immediate termination violation was the words you used. But your sustainability and social impact report says if one of your suppliers is caught to be paying below the minimum wage, it, and I quote, requires immediate improvement. Surely paying lower than minimum wage doesn't just require improvement, it requires immediate termination.
So the immediate, I believe paying below the minimum wage is one of the immediate remediation violations, i.e. they need to fix it within 30 days.
A quote from your sustainability and social impact report, which says requires immediate improvement. That's the wording.
That's why it's one of the immediate remediation violations, i.e. if they don't fix it within 30 days, then they will be terminated.
Would you not argue that breaking the law by paying less than minimum wage doesn't just require fixing it, but requires saying this is a business that we no longer want to work with, and so they should be terminated?
So first of all the suppliers do need to comply with the laws and regulations as applicable to them, and if they breach the law, there will be consequences.
Well, there aren't, though, aren't there? Because you're happy, and as you've said, that you're happy that if one of your suppliers breaks the law by paying below minimum wage, you think they just need to fix it. You don't think that an appropriate sanction is to say you're not appropriate to work with us. Do you think the correct message to give across is that SHEIN does not think that breaking the law as a supplier requires you to not work with them anymore? Is that appropriate?
I think breaking the law is there will be consequences that's associated with breaking the law. From an ESG standpoint, and it's commonly accepted principle generally, is because there are many very severe impact on many people, as I mentioned a little earlier, there are very serious matters that we have moved into immediate termination violations for actions where if the suppliers can remediate, because that's also about impact to the society in general, to the employment opportunity, to the individuals who are employed by that employer. This supplier will certainly be subject to very severe scrutiny, and they will be one of the higher risk profile suppliers, will be subject to more stricter audits to ensure that does not happen again.
Okay, Mr. Maynard.
Thank you. Just in terms of audit findings, you've got a rating from A to E. Some of the things that have been at the bottom end of that have been dormitories inside factories, child labour, etc. Would you like to say a little bit about what you would like to see stamped out? What other practices are you looking to get rid of over the next 1, 2, 3 years that you're uncomfortable with in your bottom D, E category?
Thank you for your question. So I'll perhaps just take a little bit time to explain. So the ABCDE is based on the scoring system that the auditor works with, and there are different violations, and obviously means different points are deducted. Other than when we talk about the immediate remediation violations, immediate termination violations, obviously the consequences are different. It's actually a very long list of requirements the suppliers need to meet, and they're set there with clear definitions and penalties set out in the policies. For example, as I mentioned, the immediate remediation violations that include, for example, safety and working environment, or pay on time, or excessive working hours, and some other, whether you're giving appropriate protection or the tools, or the condition of the factory, and there are many factors. So there are different items that the supplier need to comply with, and they will be subject to different type of consequences or penalties depending on what the violation is.
Okay, but no particular red lines as to things that you're like, okay, within X years we need to get rid of this, and this.
I think
you're focused on.
Perhaps the way to look at this is the most severe ones are the immediate termination violations. So the suppliers, if they trigger the immediate termination violations, then they will be forced labor, child labor, as mentioned earlier, ethical issues, integrity issues. Those would be the immediate termination violations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's been an extremely helpful evidence session. I think, to colleagues from Temu, I think there is some reassurance about some of your supplier agreements. But, Ms. Hsu, I have to say, for a company that sells £1 billion to UK consumers, and for a company which is seeking to float on the London Stock Exchange, the committee has been pretty horrified by the lack of evidence that you have provided today. You've given us almost zero confidence in the integrity of your supply chains. You can't even tell us what your products are made from. You can't tell us much about the conditions which workers have to work in. And the reluctance to answer basic questions has frankly bordered on contempt of the committee. So I hope that we can bring some clarity to this matter as quickly as we can through follow-up correspondence. But for now, this concludes this panel. Order, order. for taking a day out on maternity leave. We really, really appreciate it. Margaret, it's great to see you again. Right, we're going to go public in 5. Order. Welcome to the final panel of today's hearings on the Employment Rights Bill and industrial relations in our country. We are incredibly grateful to you both for your patience this afternoon and for joining us to give evidence as we try and light up some of the key issues at stake in this key legislation. Ms. Beels, perhaps I could start with you. We've had the opportunity to talk before about some of your views and on how the enforcement of labour standards needs to change in our country. But perhaps you could just help us set the stage for a moment. So, Resolution Foundation estimates are that there's about 400,000 workers paid below minimum wage. There's about 900,000 workers without holiday entitlement. 1.8 million people don't receive a pay slip. Why are labour standards so poor in this country right now?
Well, there are certainly those who would argue that there's not enough being done to promote those standards, and obviously there are two ways of doing that. There is both promoting compliance and also dealing with non-compliance. Pay slips is something that I focused on in the strategy that I have produced for this year, because I was getting evidence that workers were not getting pay slips, and I have gone back to the enforcement bodies and said, I would like you to be looking at this and let me know what your experience is. They don't repeat the same to me. They say that pay slips is not an issue, but insofar as I am getting evidence from independent sources that pay slips are not being given, then I think that needs to be addressed. I think there's also the question of how people get notified about their pay. With people getting electronic pay slips, for example, which can mean that if they move from one employer to another, they lose the records of the pay that they've had. So I think there is a need for employment practices to step up to how employment is working.
But what do you think is going on in the labour market right now? I mean, the picture that we've heard today in committee, the picture that you've helped paint in the past is one that's quite shocking, actually, and it's also a picture of labour standards getting worse. So I just want you to give us a sense of, strategically, what is going on in our labour market that is creating these conditions?
I think there is a fragmentation going on that is creating issues as regards employment relationships. You're getting more and more workers who are being shuffled into what are deemed to be self-employment situations, which I don't believe are appropriate for self-employment. You've got the various discussions that are being gone about workers who are getting work through platforms. What is their status? The degree of control that there is over them. Are they properly being designated as self-employed, or are they really workers? And the whole business of employment status, to my mind, does need to be addressed. I've said before to this committee that having the 3 levels of status as regards employment and 2 levels of tax is confusing, and it allows people to engage in sharp practice, shifting workers around between those. And I think it does need to be addressed. It was something that was in Make Work Pay, and I really would like to see the government stepping up to doing more to address that. I know there's discussion about having a further consultation. I think you can probably consult till the cows come home on this issue.
Yeah.
And it's about time to do something about it.
Yeah. But do you think that this is part of just a wholesale push by business to just try and reduce costs wherever and wherever they can, and basically the burden is being shunted onto, well, workers?
I think the whole business about who bears the risk about there being work there is shifting, so that workers are bearing far more of the risk, and you see that through the sort of 0 hours contract models that people go for. If there's no work, you don't get paid. The idea of a business taking responsibility for its workforce and making sure that it finds the work And there's some really interesting examples of businesses who do take that responsibility and do say, it's my job, I've got a workforce, I need to make sure that my business will provide the work that's needed to sustain that workforce.
And in your time, have you seen that pressure grow?
Yes.
Substantially? How would you characterise the change in that pressure?
I think that we are seeing sectors where I would not expect there to be self-employed zero-hours contract, care sector, adult social care. I mean, we know that there are multiple issues in that, and I can talk about that as well. But the idea of domiciliary workers being on zero-hours contracts and not being paid properly for travel time between is a disgrace, in my view.
Ms. Lyons, last quarter saw the highest number of modern slavery referrals since records began, alongside the evidence that Ms. Beels has just given us. I mean, this is a pretty horrifying fact. What do you think explains this?
I think a couple of things. I think it is particularly worrying that we now have the highest numbers of potential victims of modern slavery referred into the National Referral Mechanism, as you mentioned. I think there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, a fragmented labour market means that actually workers are more at risk, and the enforcement bodies in the labour market are often under-resourced to catch lower level labour violations before they reach a level we would deem to be modern slavery. They're also
just expand on that a little bit, just help us understand that.
So, for instance, using the example of adult social care, we want to make sure that we're able to help support workers who may be at risk of labour market violations before they get so extreme that we would deem them to be modern slavery cases. So, for instance, a worker who's not paid to drive in between jobs, I would deem that to be slightly below the level of modern slavery, but actually we want to be able to help those workers before it gets to such an extreme position that actually they're at the sharpest end of the labour market.
And when you say fragmentation, just help us understand what that means. What does fragmentation mean?
So from my perspective, thinking about if you are a victim of labour exploitation, do you understand where you can go for help and support? Is it clear which agency should be providing that care that you should go to if there's actually like a problem with your employer? Is it clear actually who has responsibility for looking after your needs, who's there to make sure that actually you are not in a high-risk position and you are looked after? I'd also actually go further from a big picture. I think there's fragmentation across government as to whose responsibility it is to make sure actually that we are doing all we can to tackle modern slavery, whether it's a Home Office responsibility or a DBT responsibility. Actually, I think there needs to be a cross-government approach. We're now 10 years out from the last modern slavery strategy. And actually, I think we need a new, invigorated approach to looking at what can be done to make sure that we're stopping the most extreme human rights violations and to actually tackle modern slavery as a whole.
We've just heard some pretty shocking evidence from, pretty shocking testimony from Tesco's that warns that the UK risks becoming a dumping ground for poor labour practice because our neighbours in Europe and in the United States are both improving their labour standards using trade policy and other legislation. Do you fear that we could become a dumping ground if we don't keep pace?
For me, I think there's two things that we need to do. I think we need to make sure that we're introducing new requirements on businesses in terms of what the Employment Rights Bill is doing across the United Kingdom, and I welcome that.
Do you think we risk becoming a place where our labour standards are almost like a weak link in the Western economies?
I think if we don't introduce mandatory human rights due diligence, that is a risk, and we've fallen behind our international partners in that space.
We have fallen behind our international partners.
Yes, we absolutely have done. We were world leading in 2015, and now actually I think it's really clear from what we've heard today and in general that when it comes to specifically transparency in supply chains, actually businesses are calling for government to go further in this space. We are no longer world leading in this space, and actually we should be doing what other international partners are.
And when you heard testimony from, for example, SHEIN, there wasn't a lot of transparency there. Did that kind of lack of transparency worry you? Is that risky when you have opaque supply chains like that?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important that businesses are proactively looking in their supply chains for potential risks of modern slavery, and they're also being transparent about what they have found. Particularly on SHEIN, I have raised my concerns with both the Department of Business and Trade and the FCA about their potential to list on the London Stock Exchange, because I think we need to be really confident that there's not human rights abuses within their supply chains before actually we allow them to do that.
How confident are you about the observation of good human rights standards today? Do you have full confidence in SHEIN supply chains?
No, and I don't think they are being transparent about what is going on in their supply chains. I'd want to hear more from them and understand that they are truly looking into the potential human rights violations within them. And I don't think they are actually currently doing that.
Thank you, Antonia Benson.
Thank you. We've heard on a number of occasions this afternoon about the need for greater resource to be available for labour market enforcement, and the spend has been flat since 2010. Now, the ILO benchmark is one labour market inspector per 10,000 workers. If we were to reach that benchmark, and we're only a third of the way there at the moment, if we were to reach that benchmark, what more could be achieved in terms of rooting out these poor practices in our labour market?
In terms of, it would change the prioritisation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that I am concerned that in terms of, for example, exploring national minimum wage violations, there's a tendency to go for big employers, and small amounts multiplied creates a big number.
Yeah.
Whereas digging deeper for perhaps fewer numbers and less in terms of total amount recovered, there's a temptation to make those sorts of trade-offs. So additional resources would mean that those trade-offs didn't need to be made in the same way, just as an example of that. I mean, I do think that there are issues around broadening the scope of investigations that the GLAA might undertake in the modern slavery space, because I find it disturbing that we have a whole lot of arrangements that apply if you're investigating modern slavery, but if it's something that's not just quite meeting that threshold, we don't have mechanisms to address that. So that would be something else that I would like organisations like the GLAA to be able to look at, and they can't. The construction industry is an area where I am really worried, because there are bad practices go on now. The government has an admirable agenda to build more homes, but where's the workforce going to come from in order to do that? And what additional risks will that pose? Construction is one of the high-risk areas within my strategy, but frankly, the bodies are not doing very much in that space at all because they don't have the capacity. And I think that is something that we're going to have to find the capacity. And I know that there is the spending review coming along, and that's going to be determining the scale of the resources for the Fair Work Agency. But if anyone thinks that we're going to really raise standards just simply by throwing three budgets together and thinking all the efficiency savings will mean that more can be done, that is not the case. There needs to be a step change in addressing the resources available to the Fair Work Agency.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that point. We heard earlier from the British Retail Consortium about the possibility of onshoring some fashion manufacturing, but the inability to guarantee labour standards here in the UK in clothing manufacturing meant that they were unable to do that. We know where clothing is made. Predecessor committees to this one have been to Leicester and seen the factories, and we know that labour violations there are just routine. And my apologies. So I guess I would be interested in your thoughts on the improvements that a single enforcement body could bring, but also whether there are any risks to bringing together the enforcement bodies.
It's a huge enterprise to create the Fair Work Agency, and that should not be underestimated. There are different risks associated with doing it. First is that enforcement eyes are taken off the ball because everybody is caught up in the concept of creating a new body. So we need to make sure, and it's part of the remit that I give myself, is to continue to hold the bodies to account to do what they're doing during this transition period. And I accept that is challenging. I want there to be a real excitement about the Fair Work Agency. I want people in the three bodies to feel excited that they are going to be part of the Fair Work Agency, and that needs really strong leadership early on, so that there's a real stake planted in the ground that says we are making we're making a step change. We're going to make things are going to be so much better. The government has talked about the Fair Work Agency being the one-stop shop place for people to go. They need to know about it. So there's a whole communications plan that is needed to be there, a whole branding plan that needs to be there. I have this idea that we can take the best of what all they do, put it together, and everything will be better. In my experience, when you bring organisations together, it's actually quite hard to do that because they have a pride in what they've done in the past and they believe that what they have done is the best way of doing things.
Can I just ask a provocative question at this point? Wouldn't it be better to keep the agencies apart?
What I get in terms of, because I have round table sessions with people, is that they contrast the experience that they have as between if they have an employment agency standards inspector coming to see them, if they have a national minimum wage inspector, or if they have a gangmaster and labour abuse inspector. And I think that workers have the right for there to be consistency of approach in terms of how things are done, the balance as between the enforcement approach versus the compliance approach, that it needs to be proportionate. One of the things I've struggled to do in my job is to work out the value for money associated with the different activities of the three bodies because they measure things differently. So I don't know whether it would be better to spend another £10 with the gangmasters or £10 with the national minimum wage.
Hand on heart, do you fear that more will be lost than gained by bringing the agencies together?
No, I don't fear that that's the case. I think that there is a huge opportunity, but it has to be really worked at to make it. The government has set up this opportunity, and I've talked long and hard about wanting there to be a single agency. So I'm really pleased that it is happening, but there are risks associated with it, and these need to be actively managed.
One of the things that many of us are pleased about is the idea that some of the enforcement, particularly through the Gangmasters and Agency Licensing Authority, will move from the Home Office to DBT, making sure that there is clear separation between Home Office functions and labour market enforcement functions. It's very, very important. And I wonder if you would agree that that's a positive. And I wonder if Eleanor wanted to comment as well from the perspective of modern slavery about how we ensure that we do effective labour market enforcement that is separated from appropriately the immigration system.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of worries about how the interaction between visa systems and employment and what that can mean. Adult social care is another. We've heard about seasonal worker visa schemes and who is responsible for what. I think we need to have arrangements in place where workers are not in fear of losing their right to be in this country as a result of putting their hands up about labour exploitation. I mean, I think I'm quite interested in what's happening in Australia at the moment because they have introduced legislative arrangements that mean that if a worker is on a work visa and reports exploitation, their right to work status is not something that is factored in to them reporting the exploitation. And I think that there needs to be an expectation on the part of workers that if they go to an authority to demonstrate that they are being exploited, that will not prejudice their right to be in this country.
Ms. Lyons, what's your view?
So I welcome that the GLAA will be moving to the remit of DBT. I think whichever government department they move to, I think they have to be able to retain their expertise when it comes to tackling modern slavery. I agree with Margaret that I welcome actually the government looking into things like the workplace justice visa, which Australia is doing, where you treat exploitation as the primary concern. I'd also take a step back, though, to say that we need to remember that victims of labour exploitation within the National Referral Mechanism, we've seen an 80% rise between 2020 to 2023 of adults reporting this form of exploitation. And that is probably just the tip of the iceberg. From speaking to victims, particularly with the last government's focus on Rwanda, there's a real fear about coming forward if they do not have documentation to remain in this country. They're operating in a kind of grey economy zone at the moment, and we need to be able to give these victims the confidence that if they do come forward, their perpetrators will be held to account in this space, and actually that they will continue to receive the support and care that they need. And I think that's why there needs to be real clarity that the Fair Work Agency will be a first responder organisation and will be referring victims into the National Referral Mechanism if they are victims of modern slavery. Okay. So it's not just a separation of moving the GLAA to DBT and then losing that support framework for victims along the way.
Okay. HMRC enforces national minimum wage. Is it a good idea to bring that within the Fair Work Agency?
Yes. I would advocate it. I don't think it's a
There
trivial
were 2
thing.
points in the past, but you've concluded that it's the right thing to do.
I think that it's really important. It's a major part of the resource. And yes, I would recommend that it should be part of a single agency.
Thank you. Commissioner Reynolds.
Chair, is the Fair Work Agency a compliance or an enforcement body? And what is the difference between the two?
It has to be both. And the compliance, is, in my view, is about helping people get it right, and enforcement is about dealing with it when they get it wrong. And that's that, and both need to be done. And I think the approach to compliance should feed off enforcement experience, because when you go in and discover that national minimum wage isn't being paid, for example, to dig a little bit below and to see whether or not this is something that a better education programme would deal with. And I'm talking about both educating businesses and also educating workers through schools programmes, through FE college type programmes, making sure that workers are better informed about their rights. So how do we cannot, I mean, it's a sort of classic thing, you can't enforce your way out of non-compliance. You need to try and encourage good behaviour and then deal with the ones who are deliberately bad.
Do you think the same agency, though, can effectively do both? Can they both play good cop and bad cop? Or if they're both compliant, if they're compliance and enforcement, would it not be seen that, the Fair Work Agency are coming with their enforcement hat on, but actually they're there to do compliance? Can they do both, and is expecting them to do both not going to diminish their work in either?
No, I don't think so, because as I said before, I think enforcement informs the understanding of why there is non-compliance. And so compliance can then address those issues in terms of we've been exploring these cases, this is what is going wrong. Here is a campaign that we could have that would be targeting this sector, for example, or this geographical area. And I mean, one of the things that the national minimum wage people do at present is have a geographical compliance approach, and they're trying to learn from that. And that's a mixture of, we're coming, if you want to know anything, ask us. We're coming, we haven't heard from you. You're operating in a sector that we know is a little bit more difficult. You might like to get in touch. And at that stage, if you sit down with us and you're discovered to be non-compliant, we're not going to throw the book at you because you've stepped forward. And then it's the ones who don't come at all that you then have to say, well, perhaps this is an enforcement case. And so that there is that continuum, which I think supports the idea of the Fair Work Agency doing both.
If I can just add to that, I think actually as an agency, it's also got to be able to focus on prevention. And actually, I don't think that's been discussed enough at the moment, but that is one of the key learnings from the space of modern slavery, that actually kind of that intelligence gathering, that data sharing, actually needs to be in place for the Fair Work Agency to be able to kind of highlight best practice amongst businesses, to be able to identify where stuff's going wrong, and to be able to kind of gather data about where there is kind of high risks happening and prevent it happening in the first place. Because at the moment, if we just focus on when things have already gone wrong, whether it's compliance or enforcement, we're not actually helping victims before it reaches that stage, and that's my particular concern.
Thank you. Rosie Writing.
Thank you. Just to go back to the Chair's comment earlier, a quote that we heard from Miss Lorains from Tesco's at the UK. She feels the UK is at risk of becoming a dumping ground, one of the many shocking things that we've heard today. Will labour substitution, offshoring, subcontracting and franchising and a rise in self-employment defeat the good intentions of the Employment Rights Bill, do you believe? Let's start with.
That's why I think employment status is such a priority issue to be addressed. I was talking to some people yesterday about the chain associated with engaging workers, which ends up with that worker being self-employed, that the client goes to an agency, that goes to an agent, and it cascades down. And I think these need to be called out as not what I think self-employment was meant to be about. Businesses sloughing off their responsibilities to work to their what I would regard as employees, even if the law is such that it can't be demonstrated as such.
Thank you. And Ms Lyons, do you agree?
I think the Fair Work Agency should be looking to protect all workers across the board. I'm obviously here to speak about victims of modern slavery. Quite often they're not covered in terms of being hired by legitimate businesses, and I don't actually think currently the Employment Rights Bill does introduce any new powers to help protect them in that space.
Thank you.
Just want to nail this because we're going to be looking at substitution risks next week. We saw some bad stories before Christmas about companies abusing self-employment rules, using these apps to try and get gig economy workers who clearly weren't self-employed workers. Would you counsel the government to crack on with getting this definition sorted out?
Absolutely. It is really...
Are you worried that the timetable might be slipping?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Just wanted to...
Just to give a straight answer to a straight question.
Want to know where we stand?
Very refreshing.
Mr Weston.
Very refreshing.
Thank you, Chair. A question for you, Ms Lyons. We've heard this afternoon about the importance of supply chain, and where there is sort of opportunity for exploitation because of how opaque the supply chains are. The proposed Fair Work Agency will be responsible for enforcing the Modern Slavery Act, but doesn't propose any amendments relating to the supply chain side in the legislation. In which case, do you think Modern Slavery Act is still fit for purpose?
I think the Modern Slavery Act is fit for purpose. I think the difficulty, as you say, has come from how it is enforced and operationalised. And the bodies that are responsible for doing that need to have the resourcing and need to have the funding to be able to properly investigate modern slavery cases, to be able to refer those to the police is a really important relationship. So actually we can go after the perpetrators of this crime. If the Fair Work Agency was independent from government, I would say that it should have more responsibility around transparency in supply chains. But I think at the moment it's proposed to be an executive agency, which I don't think will have the kind of ability and powers and gravitas to be able to hold those transparency and supply chain powers if we were to put them in there. So I think we do need to bump up Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act. That is the one part of the Modern Slavery Act I would improve with new legislation. I would make mandatory human rights due diligence legislation come into place, and I think this government should do that. but I think that probably needs to sit at Secretary of State level or within a kind of independent body that can actually hold businesses to account. And I don't think currently the proposed Fair Work Agency as just an executive agency would be able to do that.
In your view, do you think we are in deficit compared to other nations like the US or to, say, groups such as the European Union with our Modern Slavery Act, that we absolutely need to tighten up and make it more comprehensive?
So I think actually the Modern Slavery Act is still fit for purpose. It was world leading when it was passed in 2015. I think where we have fallen behind is specifically in that transparency and supply chains part of the Modern Slavery Act. And that is the area where we don't do as well as America or the EU, as we say. And actually, we do need new legislation in that space. We need there to be mandatory human rights due diligence. We do need to catch up with international partners. And we do need to make sure that we're levelling the playing field across all businesses so they're encouraged to be clear and transparent about what they are doing to tackle modern slavery in their supply chains.
We've heard earlier about certain jurisdictions where they can prevent goods coming into a country because they don't comply with the legislation of that country, and so contravene, say, the equivalent of a Modern Slavery Act. Would you welcome that kind of legislation here in the UK?
Are you speaking specifically about import bans or the US?
Import bans.
So I think the priority areas for this country are to make sure that we are enforcing properly the Modern Slavery Act 2015. I think then we do need to bump up, like I say, the transparency and supply chains legislation. And then alongside that, I think it's right that this government considers whether import bans would work. But I think that it's kind of a third part of the puzzle, if that makes sense. So you need to have the right labour market enforcement systems in the UK. You need there to be clear transparency and supply chains legislation across all businesses in the UK. And then you can consider whether import bans work too. But until we've got those first two things lined up, I don't think import bans are the right thing to focus on quite yet.
Okay. The most recent US MCA trade deal allows the US to go into, say, Mexico, wherever, and go into at factory level to undertake checks. Is that something you think we should be doing?
So I think it's right that we use
trade deals.
Yeah, I think it's right that we use trade deals to ensure that at a bare minimum, our partners we're doing the deals with are including labour standards across the board. I think this government should look at whether things like plant level inspections as part of the USMCA work. And actually, I think this is an area where we should be learning from international partners and we should be working closely with them to make sure that we actually have the right enforcement mechanisms in this country.
Okay. And just a final question. Do you think there are any unintended consequences of the UK adopting a much more robust approach, really, to using, to those businesses using supply chains where there is known to be forced labour present in those factories?
Personally, I think we need to think about the unintended consequences of not introducing this legislation from my perspective. I think as long as it is done in collaboration with businesses, working with those businesses who are trying to lead the way in this space, making sure it's not a tick box exercise, and it's also ensuring there's kind of clear frameworks in place and accountability frameworks. Actually, there's no need for there to be unintended consequences. We should be encouraging businesses to look for that modern slavery within their supply chains, be clear and transparent about where it is and what they are doing to address it and fix it. And I think that's absolutely something that this government should be doing.
Beels, anything to add to that?
I would like to perhaps reflect a little bit backwards on what Eleanor was saying in terms of the Fair Work Agency and it being an executive agency, which means that it's in essence part of the department.
Yeah.
And to my mind, it's really important that we reflect on the role of the advisory board.
Yeah.
The advisory board is a tripartite board with business unions and independent experts. And the bill requires the Secretary of State to consult about the strategy, the 3-year strategy for the agency, and about the annual report. And it also gives the remit to the advisory board to advise the Secretary of State if he asks them for advice. And I want to see a really strong and effective agency, and I think that means a role for the advisory board. I think this could be captured within something like a framework agreement between the Secretary of State and the advisory board, where there is a stronger voice for the advisory board. I don't see the point of setting up this tripartite arrangement and not using it and creating a voice that is talking about whether some of the issues that you've been raising with it, is it as good as it needs to be? Are we using the money as well as you might? There needs to be much more transparency about what it is doing, and that you should be having some sort of dashboard that it accounts to Parliament, to all the stakeholders about, because it's really important that people have confidence in what it is doing. And I see the board having something of the role that you might expect more of an arm's length body board, but actually being there to support the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is a busy person doing lots of things, and that the advisory board should be set out, should be supporting him, and that should be set out in a formal document that is presented to Parliament, so that everybody knows how it's going to work.
Super. Well, that has been an extremely helpful wrap-up to our session today. Thank you very much. Your evidence has been both candid and compelling, in sharp contrast to a lot of the evidence that we've heard this afternoon. So thank you for your evidence today. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you again for taking time out of your leave to join us and give evidence to our session today. That concludes this panel, and that concludes this session. Order, order.
Thank you.
Thank you.